So, Jimmy, this is an Indianapolis sports talk radio program, which means that we're going to focus mostly on what happened last night in Houston, which that's the Pacers,
Man, what
as
an up
well
and
as
down
some college basketball, and continue our talk about the Colts' inevitable path towards world domination and getting to the Super Bowl this year. But I am curious, since we have not seen you since, just from your perspective as an admitted Kansas City Chiefs fan, what is your 1 to 10? What is your level of concern, and how much did it ruin your holidays?
Level of concern in the context of like where their expectations are, right? Like I thought going in, they should still contend for a Super Bowl. The scale on that is an 8.
Okay.
An 8 being like, yeah, I'm super concerned, and I think that they're probably going to, if they are fortunate enough to lock down the division, which I think they should this weekend. But then again, I thought that last weekend, they'll get a home playoff game. As long as they don't play like the Browns, because I feel like the Browns defensively, the way Kansas City's playing, would do just nightmarish things to them. I think they'll win a home playoff game. They'll probably lose on the road, and then you need to revamp everything in that wide receiver room over the offseason.
Yeah, the receiving room is. We talked about that yesterday, right?
Or they can just get rid of Taylor Swift. I mean, that's the problem.
I mean,
Jimmy.
they could.
That's the real problem.
She has nothing to do with anything other than
Correct.
Happiness
Lies!
there of Travis Kelce.
Okay. Yesterday, Jimmy, I don't know if you noticed, but Brennan King was in for you yesterday.
I didn't know that.
We had a surprise guest yesterday, and this is the time of year during the holidays when people come to visit and you can't get rid of them. You know what I mean? What do they say about relatives at the holidays? It's like fish.
Here he comes.
After 2 days, they stink.
I see him coming, Jake. I see him coming.
He is. There you see. I thought he left yesterday, but apparently he is still here hanging around in the hallway and now walking into the studio. It is correct. Robin the Genie, I stayed the night here. They're lovely, by the way, spacious studio. I spent the night in your old studio because you have moved and it's vacant. But I was asking all of you yesterday, but Jimmy was not here, so I stayed to get his opinion.
Very kind.
Jimmy Cook, I did not want you to feel left out, so please for me write on a sheet of paper your prediction for the Super Bowl in February, the 2 teams that shall participate.
Now, I didn't hear this segment yesterday, so is this like a legitimate write it on a paper, give it to Eddie, and then open it up on Super Bowl weekend, or am I just actually speaking who I think is going to be there?
Speaking.
Okay, just want to make sure. Didn't know how literal we were taking.
I have a reservation at Weber Grill across the street, so I will be leaving shortly.
I think it's going to be the 49ers and the Dolphins.
I'm ordering mahi-mahi across the street.
Enjoy
very
that.
fitting.
Enjoy that mahi-mahi.
I will write down and record your prediction. Eddie, you had the Cleveland Browns and San Francisco, right?
I did.
I don't really think these are going to be the 2 teams, to be honest with you. I really think right now the 2 best teams are San Francisco and Baltimore, but that's just such an unpopular – I mean, it's such an easy narrative. So I went with Cleveland and Dallas. But it really is hard to see. The NFC feels –
Why are you both on Cleveland? Is it just the defense?
The
Do you feel
defense
like,
is so
yes,
good.
that's going to carry
Well,
you in
here's the
Flacco's?
thing.
Flacco's looked good. Like, I'm just –
Jimmy, there's really no – this is the way I look at it when you are looking this time of year at predicting the Super Bowl.
Okay.
We've seen enough now. There's enough body of work out there that which teams have been the most consistent and overcome the topsy-turvy times and have stayed the course the most consistently. And truth be told, you know, Miami's offense is electric. But, for example, and I think Tua is really good, but if he's not able to get the ball, like, say, to a Tyreek Hill for one game, you know, it kind of slows everything down. And Buffalo, when they're on, is really good, but they also have off days. The Indianapolis Colts have days where if Minshew's playing at a high level, and now with Jonathan Taylor healthy, they can surprise some people. They can do like a 94 let-her-rip run, 95. But there are too many times where things just collapse for them. With the one team, to me, that has been the most consistent of their strength is Cleveland. That defense has not wavered the whole year. And in the postseason, when the weather kind of gets crappy and everything else, that slows teams down naturally in its own self. But if you have a really strong defense, that can carry you. And that's the one area that they have not been wavered in. That defense has delivered for them consistently through the course of the year. Then Dallas, I think Dallas, San Francisco gives you the best law of averages here, right? Because they played the best, the most consistent for sure. Philadelphia at their best is really good, but we see now that their best is not necessarily every single game. And Dallas at their best is extremely competitive, and they're good. But again, they also take some games off. But I really do think it's probably San Francisco, but just to kind of be an iconoclast, I went with Dallas. The NFC, though, does feel like it seems like if there's going to be like a 6 or 7 seed that's going to shock the world and carry their way into the Super Bowl, it's going to be out of the AFC, don't you think?
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I would take that a step further. And if we're looking at like what I'm rooting to have happen, take the Chiefs out of the equation entirely. Like I would love to see Detroit make a run here. Like I think that would make a lot of people happy. I'm not saying from a rooting interest standpoint, just like, oh wow, the Lions are not only back in the playoffs for the first time in 30 years, but they're going to make a run to the Super Bowl. How about that? That'd be great to root for that. That said, and Jake, tell me if you agree with this or not. If you gave me the choice of the top 2 seeds right now, and you gave me the choice of, do you feel more confident in the top 2 seeds or the field in each conference, I feel far more confident if you gave me San Francisco and Philadelphia than I do Baltimore and Miami. Like where things stand right now.
I would agree with that. Partially because of Buffalo, right?
Correct, yes.
I mean,
and I also think, like, even though my panic number is an 8 for Kansas City, like, they're running out of time. Like, I don't know that they're going to figure it out. But in some of their losses this year, it's been a turnover here, a drop pass here, and that's the difference sometimes, right? Their margin for error is basically 0 in this current form. That said, like, their defense has played great this year. Like, they could still, despite everything, make a run. I just don't, like I said, panic number is an 8.
For years, Jimmy, in the college football playoff, and good afternoon to you, by the way, on a Wednesday that feels like a Tuesday. My name is Jake Query. That is Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison here as well. It is Query & Company on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. If you're a listener, then you are part of the company, by the way. Jimmy Cook is the CEO. Is that right? No, you're the president, right?
Correct.
Eddie Garrison's the CEO of the company. And we need to get back in that. People calling in and letting us know what area of the company they are, because I love when people come up to me and say, hey, man, I'm in the company. And I want to keep that alive for 24. We're hiring in 24, by the way. We are hiring in 24. We lifted a hiring freeze to get Brendan
That's right.
off of the intern status, and he is now hired. So we are hiring in 24. Paul is our director of giddiness. That position is filled, right? We have several women that have volunteered to be the CFO of the company. We have no HR department, and Derek is our leader of veteran affairs. Outside of that, we're wide open. But back to the point about the college or the NFL playoffs. If you look at the college football playoff, there have been several years, Jimmy. This year might have actually been one of them. But there were several years. I want to say one of the COVID years that Ohio State was beaten late in the year and did not, as a result, get to go to the Big Ten championship game. But they still got in the college football playoff because everybody knew they were one of the 4 best teams. And there have been other years where Ohio State stubbed their own toe, and as a result, they were left out. And literally anybody that had a half a brain that liked anybody that was a fan of anyone other than Ohio State was like, do not let Ohio State in. Do not let them in because they are literally the wolf that's going to come in and ruin the party and eat all the chickens, right? Just because everybody knew Ohio State was in those years, even if their record didn't indicate it, they knew they were one of the 4 best teams. And that's the Buffalo Bills this year, is it not? Like, I'm not saying they're one of the 4 best teams in football, but when they are playing at their highest level and Josh Allen is doing Josh Allen things, you don't want any part of them. You don't want any part of them. And that's the team that I think people are like, okay, let's just keep them out, right? Last night in Houston, Pacers 123-117 over Houston. I'll tell you what, Jimmy, I think, would you agree with this? It's great to see the Pacers win a game. And as much fun as it was, for the in-season tournament and for them to be the conversation of the league. And Tyrese Halliburton's coming out party as a superstar or a rising star, but probably a better way of saying it. You couldn't sustain winning games 145 to 140 forever, right? And it's weird to think they're only a game over 500. I mean, it's not like they're setting the world afire, but we had said forever, and what you're seeing now for the Pacers is the awkward teenage, pimply headgear years. They're learning their way. They're going through puberty right now. And they're going through some growing pains of, for a long time, like the Pacers were the teenage kid that was 3 inches taller than everyone in the class, but kind of tripped over themselves and was awkward. And now their body's filling out a little bit. And it's kind of awkward, and on certain days they look like Adonis, and on other days they look like they don't know what to do with themselves. And as they are learning how to kind of morph from an offensive juggernaut that had zero regard for defense into a team that does prioritize defense, in particular down the stretch, they're going to have some areas where they look kind of gangly. I thought last night at one point on the floor, if I'm not mistaken, their lineup on the floor at one point was Miles Turner, Isaiah Jackson, I believe Jalen Smith was on the floor as well. I think Smith and Turner interchanged, so it might have been Smith, Jackson.
It was probably when Turner got into foul trouble.
Yeah, Nesmith, Nembhard, and then Halliburton. And then Hield came in eventually for, I think it was Nesmith. When Nesmith and eventually Smith came in. But my point being, when you had Jackson, Smith/Turner, one or the other, with Nembhard and Nesmith on the floor, you finally had some legitimate defensive effort, but you compromise a little bit offensively. I mean, Buddy Hield comes in and, you know, he does Buddy Hield things where, yeah, he was only 3 of 11 from three-point range, but he hit like 2 of them in like a 90-second stretch, and a lead went from 3 back up to like 8 or 9. And you're like, okay, that's why he's out there. Halliburton, when Halliburton has the ball in his hands, he is an absolute magician. There's no doubt about it. 33 points, 10 assists last night. He does have an ability to get 2 rebounds. I mean, 6 of them. But on the defensive end, there are times where, not times, the majority of time for Halliburton, if the ball's not the challenge for Halliburton right now, and I think he's aware of it. I don't think he's like obstinate about it. But the challenge for Halliburton, Jimmy, quite frankly, is to keep him invested when the ball's not in his hands, quite frankly. That sounds harsh, but in particular on the defensive end, I think at times he gets caught napping a little bit, or just almost like he's daydreaming about what can happen at the other end of the floor.
Happened a couple times late last night, especially on avoiding second chance rebounds. And that's not always his fault. Like sometimes he just has a bigger guy on him. But like,
I know exactly. Totally
there
agree.
There were 2 or 3 times last night where it's like you're looking at the ball. Where's the self-awareness to, oh, this guy's going to come around me and take that? Like, and again, sometimes he was undersized, and I don't fully fault him for that, but other times, yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It felt like asleep at the wheel. Additionally, and I want to give, as you have done, defensively, this team a lot of credit, because I thought after and Eddie, correct me if I'm saying his name wrong, even though I heard it 15 times last night.
Alperen Şengün.
One more time on the first name?
Alperen
Şengün. After about the 4th or 5th time that Şengün put Miles in a blender, I thought that, okay, they're going to pack it in. This is going to be it. And then Miles winds up responding the final 2.5 minutes defensively. And he had a really solid game. I'm not trying to just single him out, but that's the matchup that he drew more often than not. Most notably late when the Rockets are trying to either tie the game or get back within a possession. He has just a great kind of baited Şengün into it and has a nice rejection that leads to a Pacers basket on the other end. This is another sample size game of, as you mentioned, Jake, if you're going to take the foot off the gas to some extent offensively to focus on defense, how far is the drop-off? And again, Houston is not Milwaukee, which they're going to play here in a couple of weeks twice. They're not Boston, which they're going to play here in a couple of weeks to open the year. But they are a team that are in a similar boat as you in regards to pursuit of a playoff spot, in the Western Conference. So you're just looking at where they are standings-wise together. I think the Pacers are more put together than Houston is in terms of like where they want to go. This is a Rockets team that poured a lot of money into this roster in the offseason. Feels like they have a nice young core, and they were 12-2 at home going into that. The Pacers lost 4 straight. So to have that type of response game for yourself, now 2-2 over these last 4, I still would like them to close to be 4-2 going into the calendar year when we turn. That said, though, all around, they were able to make enough plays, especially late, to pull this out in Houston.
This, by the way, from Jim Merritt. Hey, Jake, is the company government affairs position open? Yes, and I'll tell you why. 2 reasons why Jim Merritt's hired is our director of governmental affairs on the company. Number 1, because he has experience in mayoral campaigns, and eventually, when I run for mayor, he's the guy that he's going to be my campaign manager to help me out here. And again, when I run for mayor, and again, part of my thing of my mayoral campaign, Jimmy, and again, call it brilliant foresight. A lot of what I run on, all I have to do is mention it, and then it eventually starts happening.
Rockstar?
What's that?
Rockstar? Mountain Dew?
I do run on that too, right? Good. That was a quick line there, Eduardo. So, for example, the scooters. I said that when I become mayor, the scooters are all going into White River. Well, one of those companies just filed bankruptcy anyway. So, problem solved, right? Half of it's right out the window. Taken care of. Secondly, who is the one person? Do you guys remember?
Is it you?
Thank you.
Okay.
Do you guys remember, and I can't recall, to be honest, whether it was on this program or when I was doing the morning show, but does Green Lawn Cemetery mean anything to you guys?
No.
Okay.
Was the lawn green?
It was.
Good.
Because it was fertilized by the fact it was a cemetery.
Is this the cemetery that was before the Diamond District?
So, yes. So when the Indy 11, and don't get me started on my whole thing about my apprehension, which is going to end up biting this city about the amount of money that we're going to have to pay for this Indy 11 project, which is the most under-the-table, behind-the-scenes thing ever. And I give credit to the 11. Kudos to them. But they still have yet to say, to my knowledge, how much public money is going to end up going into the Indy 11 park for a team that's never going to be in the MLS. But I digress. They got the land of the old Diamond Chain factory warehouse district, okay?
Yep.
For relatively inexpensive because nobody else had purchased the Diamond Chain property. And the reason they hadn't purchased the Diamond Chain property is because there were 2 things in play that virtually everyone backed away from. Number 1, there is still a huge amount from the Diamond Chain. When Diamond Chain moved in, there already were like oil and like fuel, petroleum stuff in the soil itself. I mean, it was kind of a hazmat issue. And I can't recall if that was from stuff they had within their own division or stuff that had been there prior. But the biggest thing was this. Diamond Chain left the blueprint. The Diamond Chain warehouse or factory, whatever you want to call it, corporation, left the blueprint saying each time that they did renovation to that property, which is just west of Lucas Oil Stadium across the river, they would run into, understandably and rightly so, a huge red tape and then stalled issue because human remains would be found, which then, you don't just discard human remains. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. That is the site of the original Green Lawn Cemetery. The Green Lawn Cemetery was the largest cemetery in Indianapolis until Crown Hill that was predominantly an African-American or essentially the pauper cemetery of Indianapolis in the late 19th, early 20th century. And so while they decided to eventually utilize the land, and you got to consider that many of the graves that were in the Green Lawn Cemetery, totally unfairly and unjustly, but it is a reality of the times historically speaking, many of the graves that were there were among a class or a group of people that city and society at that time had deemed to be in a lower class. So it was as if their remains were not of the value or the preservation necessity of other areas. So Green Lawn Cemetery was essentially the pauper cemetery or a mass cemetery of African Americans. And then when they decided to develop it for industrial purposes, they allegedly exhumed all of the graves. Well, there were like, I don't know, something like 7,000 or 8,000 people buried there. And so they allegedly exhumed all of them and moved them to, I believe, a mass grave, I think in Crown Hill. I can't recall exactly. But when the Diamond Chain built their building, and each time that they would do renovations or expand, they would consistently be stalled because they would unearth more remains. And you don't just like all of a sudden throw those into a recycle bin. I mean, there are authorities that have to come in and all kinds of situations that go, well, lo and behold, what happened? The Indy 11 buys that, and everybody says, actually, you know what? Like, you're not just going to come in and dig up and put a stadium in there. You're going to run into issues because you're going to come across not only hazmat situations from the prior tenants, but also, oh, yeah, that's right, human remains. And guess what happened? Guess what happened?
They didn't find it. I'm just kidding. They found some.
Yes.
Turns out not everybody was exhumed.
And they're going to continue to find them, and this is going to take forever. Understandably so, because you have that is the resting place.
You said that wrong. It's forever.
Nice. There you go.
Yes, that is true. I'm telling you. So, at any rate, Mayor Jake could have seen that coming. But Jim Merritt, number one, because he could help out with my mayoral campaign. But number two, my girlfriend Shannon's first job in Indianapolis, she worked for a company that was owned by Jim Merritt and his family. And never once does his name come up where she does not immediately say, he is the nicest guy and the best boss I've ever had. So for that reason, because he's the nicest guy and the best boss ever, he has to be in the company, right? We need some nice in the company.
We need high-level culture. Yes, I agree.
We need some nice in the company.
Yep.
But back to the point, because, again, bright light and quick squirrel that flashed past. I thought last night down the stretch for the Pacers, they did what they needed to do. And Houston's not bad, actually. Houston is – they have some young pieces for sure. Go ahead and give me the name of the Turkish star again, Eddie.
Alperen Şengün.
Is Alperen Şengün the least known 20-point-per-game scorer in the NBA?
I would be willing to say yes.
I would say no.
Ooh. Okay, hold on. So let's we're gonna play this game, Eddie. You ready? I'm gonna look up on NBA.com the scoring. I'm not saying you're wrong. The NBA scoring the scoring leaders in the association right now. Okay, and we are going to look at the 20-point-per-game scores and see how many of them would be listed above our boy in Houston in terms of the obscurity level, because it's pretty high, right? Now, here's the problem. I'm trying to get to NBA.com, and it automatically takes me to the Pacers page, and I can't just get to the regular NBA page for the scoring leaders.
That means you are a loyal consumer of Pacers.com content.
It's driving me crazy. Okay, now I'm here. Okay?
I would say if you're an NBA fan, you know that Alperen Şengün is really good and that he's averaging 20, but I don't think if you're a common fan, I don't think you would.
Okay. Just for example, I just said it so that here's the thing. I will bet you $20. If we lined up right now 5 callers about Alperen Şengün and I asked them 2 different questions about him, I'll bet you none of the 5 would be able to answer the 2 questions that I'm about to ask. What do you want to bet? And he's a very good player for sure.
I'd probably side with you on this point of it.
I would bet you if there, and to your point, Eddie, there are 2 different things here. There are Pacer fans and NBA fans, right?
Correct.
Avid followers of the NBA, like if you play fantasy basketball and that kind of thing, you may be right. But of 20-point-per-game scores, okay, I'm looking right now, all of these names, Jeremy Grant maybe? Mikal Bridges maybe? Are guys that might be people would struggle with? I don't know, man. I think, okay, give me one. I got one here. Oh, he's not 20 point per game, though. He's not 20 point. Devin Vassal's got to be up there, right?
Vassell, yeah.
Vassell, sorry.
Case in point.
Yeah, case in point, right?
Exactly.
I know he was a Florida State guy, right? Wasn't he on? Didn't he play for Leonard Hamilton? But
yes.
Okay, give me another one. Who are you thinking of?
What do you mean?
You said that you don't think he would be the most obscure 20-point per game scorer in the NBA.
I would throw Jaren Jackson Jr. into that conversation because I think everyone understands that he's a good player, but I don't think people view him as somebody who scores 21 a game.
But I think people – I would agree with that, but I think people are more familiar with him. They know of him.
Well, yeah, because he just won Defense Player of the Year.
And
Memphis is good.
But people know who he is. I would bet you –
I think people would be surprised there's anybody on Detroit that's averaging north of 20. And, hey, Kate Cunningham is. There you go.
How about this? The Arizona Diamondbacks have won a game more recently than the Detroit Pistons.
Beautiful. I mean, it's not – I feel for Detroit fans, I do. But
if you're going on timing,
yeah.
I mean, they both last won on the same day, October 28th.
You just actually him.
What'd you say?
I just said you just actually him.
Yeah.
The Arizona Diamondbacks have won a game more recently than the Detroit Pistons.
They both won on Saturday, October 28th.
Okay. The Arizona Diamondbacks have won more recently than the Detroit Pistons.
That is true.
That is a fact.
Okay.
It is. Look it up.
I did yesterday.
Okay.
They both won on Saturday, October 28th.
What time?
That's what I'm saying. Oh, my God. I did not go that far down into the Rolodex.
If you did, you would realize that I'm right, and the Arizona Diamondbacks have won more recently than the Detroit Pistons.
Every second counts.
I didn't say you were wrong. I was just saying, hey, they won the same day.
Okay, but again, the fact that a Major League Baseball team who hasn't played in 4 months,
61 days,
whatever it may be. But I want to go back to the point, though. Tell me a player in the NBA that it has to be the most obscure 20-point per game scorer in the league, right?
Franz Wagner.
Is he averaging 20?
20 and a half.
I think more people would know of him because he played collegiately in the Big Ten.
Yeah, based on the category of information of a Franz Wagner, of a Cade Cunningham, I remember that guy from college.
Yeah,
you have that
you've heard the name before,
already.
Right? How many? I think you'd be surprised, Eddie, how many people last night watching that game were like, "I've never heard of this guy."
Maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
I'll throw the hand up. I've fallen behind on the NBA this year other than the Pacers. And usually, in years past, I prided myself on being Eddie, consuming all I can with the NBA. I had to pull a Shaq here. I was unfamiliar with your game, young man.
What I'm saying is this:
I have no clue.
I'm not saying that they would be surprised that they're averaging 20. I'm saying of players that are averaging 20 a game,
that you could name the player.
The one that the fewest number of people would admit to have known their name or their background.
Yeah, I would agree.
Cam Thomas or Jaren Jackson or Wagner. I mean, at the very least, people are like, oh, yeah, I remember him because he played at Michigan, or I remember him because he was with the Nets.
There's
or
more
whatever.
Crossover points than an international player.
But a 21-year-old player that was selected in the first round by Oklahoma City, who've had 15 first-round selections in the last 3 years, that played professionally in Turkey and then came over and is playing for a team that a year ago was one of the truly fledgling teams in terms of their roster.
You're saying that's not a household name?
Correct. I'm saying I'll bet you most people listening to me right now are like...
Again, it's the crossover points. There's not as many areas for recognition based on some of the other guys we've listed off. I'm not going to argue that.
But nonetheless, good player. And I thought down the stretch last night, the guy that didn't get enough praise, Jimmy, and he just doesn't in general, he doesn't get enough praise in general, is Miles Turner. Miles Turner made plays down the stretch defensively. I mean, down the stretch when they needed it, he hit a three, but aside from that, I think a lot of people lose sight of this. Miles Turner, when he's the only one left on the island, sure, he's going to struggle. But when Miles Turner is out there with a Jalen Smith or with an Isaiah Jackson kind of running alongside of him and kind of helping him on the other side, he is a really good rim protector that not only holds his ground and manages to, for the most part, avoid fouls with it, but to run interference and then create their transition the other way. And at the very least, if their transition stalls and he's the last one down, he can hit a three as soon as he gets down there.
There were a couple times where he had to go out on the perimeter with Sengun. I thought he got cooked in the fourth early on and thought that was going to lead to what you were going to see the rest of the final frame, and it didn't. He affected a couple of shots, 2 dunks that would have probably been layup line-like dunks if Miles isn't there to close late, that basically had point swings to them down the stretch. And yeah, it was there for timely rebounding. You're right, Jake. If you're putting him as the last line of defense anywhere, any scenario you want, on an island, the last bouncer at the club, like he's not going to let people in more often than not. Sure, maybe one person's going to know the secret entrance over there that he's not monitoring, but otherwise it is as good a luxury for the way they want to play as anybody on this roster, and maybe as any point in that role in the NBA right now.
The last night when they needed it down the stretch, they were able to make plays, and it was good to see, right? And that's a good basketball team they did it against. Dustin, is it Dopirak or Dopirak? Dopirak. You know, I mean there's no disrespect for them.
I know. It's the Osterman complex.
I know it's Osterman.
I know you do now, but that's the...
So this is the one I've got to work on now. Dopirak, right?
Eddie, I'm correct on that, yes. Thank you. Eddie nods. Eddie nods for the listening audience.
Dustin Dopirak going to join us. 1 o'clock here on a Wednesday. It's Query & Company, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
Let Bill Estes put you behind the wheel of...
Started, but I want to talk about this before we move about the cabin today, and I know we'll get into it. More Pacers coverage, Dustin Dopirak coming up at the top of the hour, but it caught my eye in real detail about the second quarter of last night's game. I really like, maybe more than any other alternate logo, and I think it's just brand new this year, the astronaut dunking the basketball.
Do you really?
In Houston. Yeah, I don't know what it is.
Maybe
it's because
cool.
I like space, like exploration, stuff like that. I like the history there, obviously, of mission control, everything in Houston and NASA. But the idea of the astronaut dunking the basketball, I don't know. I was infatuated with it at times last night.
Since you like space.
Sure.
I've probably bragged this to you before. You know, one of the few things that I've done in my life that I think is pretty cool, that only because I don't know how many people can say they did it, and it was completely by luck and chance. Actually, it was by simply asking that I was able to do it.
You went to NASA.
You sent us pictures from Michigan.
Aside from that, in addition to that.
Okay,
so when IndyCar was racing in Houston, Paul Page, who has a great relationship with NASA and with just the Air Force in general, got us passes to go into NASA, into Mission Control and NASA in Houston. So we went in, we got a tour of NASA that was, I hate to say this, like I almost felt guilty because like we were the gerbils, because like the tours, the paid tours were like on the walkways behind, on the other side of the glass, like looking down while we were like down, you know. We got to go into the flight director of the original moon landing, into that whole room. I got to sit in the seat.
Oh, man.
But then we went into, I don't know if I sent you this photo, but we went into the mission control of the space station. And you could see they had like a huge, the wall, essentially, the entire wall was a screen from the camera on the outside of the space station. And when we were there, it was like 6 o'clock, I think, in the evening in Houston. So it was like 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning in Australia, and it was flying over Australia. But I don't know on what time zone the space station operates, but they were asleep. And the guy actually said, yeah, we're getting ready to wake them up for the day. And, like, we were standing right there, and there was a microphone just like there is to me right now. And I said, can I wake him up? And he said, sure. In, like, 8 minutes, we're doing it. And so, literally, like, as everybody was kind of milling around, he's like, hey, did you want to do it? And he hit the little button, and I said, space station, like, good morning. It's time to, you know, and he gave me, like, the line to read.
That's a 1 of 1 right there.
So I got to say that I got to wake up the International Space Station for a day.
That's a 1 of 1 experience. That's so cool.
I actually did not notice as I was watching the game. At no point did I notice that was an astronaut at mid. I guess to me it looked like a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a transformer, like cartoon character dunking the basketball.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. At first look, I wasn't sure, and then I'm like, well, wait a minute. There's no animal that represents, like, I thought maybe there was a mascot I'd missed the last 10 years. Like, there's no animal that's there. Well, there is. They do have a mascot, but it's not, like, directly tied to what their brand is about. And so I'm looking at it like, well, it can't be that. It's not like a Memphis Grizzly or Boomer at half court. I'm like, oh, it's an astronaut. That's cool. Okay, Houston, we're going into the full NASA space station, playing into the Rockets. So, anyway, there's my random thought of the day. I really enjoyed
thought also that I pointed out before. Do you know why they're called the Houston Rockets?
Give it to me.
Eddie, would you like to guess?
I can't remember.
You can't remember?
I don't think I know, other than if we're playing in the NASA and Mission Control.
I know you've explained it before, but I just can't remember why.
I mean, you would think it's the Houston Rockets. It's because of NASA,
correct?
Right?
That would be my thought.
The Houston Rockets actually played their first year in San Diego, and the owner of the franchise was the owner of a company that made rocket heads in San Diego as part of the military base. What are the odds of that? I mean, literally, that would be like, you know what I mean?
Yes,
I mean,
yeah.
It would be literally like a guy in Nashville in the car business owning a football team and calling it the Automobiles and then moving it to Detroit.
Right.
Like, what are the odds of that?
Astronomical.
You think? Thank you. Do you think Houston was his only option? Do you think he's like, listen, if I don't get the proper funding from my franchise, I'm moving to Houston or Cape Canaveral. Those are my two options, and I'm standing by it.
Nowhere else you can go.
I want luxury suites, and I want revenue. I want 40% of the revenue, or I'm gone. Well, where are you going to go? Cape Canaveral or Houston? We'll go to Houston then. What do they have there? They got a bunch of strip malls, and I'm going there. Okay, great, go.
Good luck.
It's the third largest city in the country now, but it's nothing but Keystone at the Crossing times 50,000. For the Pacers now, they are on their way from that win. And, again, a win that gets them, I guess, a little bit of defensive flexibility, if you want to, like confidence maybe. I mean, they said afterwards, right, that they are coming along defensively.
It also makes me feel better to my theory of when they tried that against Memphis, or at least it looked like they tried that. we were talking about that, well, maybe they can't. They just need to play high pace, and if they go defensive strong instead of offensive-minded, you lose a step offensively. And I had brought up, well, could have been fatigue. It was a back-to-back, and then someone else had pointed out to me it was also like their 5th game in 7 nights as well. So a lot of maybe fatigue aspects there. And I get it. Everybody's dealing with that. But to be able to see it against Houston after a 3-day break between that matchup against Orlando makes you think, no, they are capable of this. They just were really exhausted over that stretch of games they were playing.
In Chicago, by the way, taking on the Bulls, that's going to be on Thursday, then back home to take on the New York Knickerbockers on December 30th, a little time off, and then in Milwaukee for New Year's Day. That'd be kind of fun to go up, spend New Year's Eve in Milwaukee, and then go to the Pacers-Bucks game on New Year's Day. What are your New Year's Eve plans, Jimmy?
We're going to Topgolf.
Okay.
We've done that a time or two, and we reserved a bay there, so we're going to go play Topgolf into
What time
the
is your bay reserved?
I think like 9:30.
You're going to be swinging for 2.5 hours?
I know.
Man, it's a lot of beer drinking, a lot of wings.
It is. It's a lot of beer, a lot of wings.
Now, do you stay until midnight, though, or do you go home?
We'll stay. Traditionally, we've stayed.
Do they do a big deal at midnight?
It's been a couple years since we've gone, but I believe they have like either fireworks or some type of like light show deal.
Eddie Garrison, your New Year's Eve plans?
I think I'm going over to my parents. They're having a party. Inviting some people over.
Are you going to, when I was a kid, my parents, for New Year's Eve, we would take hole punchers and sit there, and my sister and I, and punch the hole puncher into a bowl to make confetti. And then when midnight came, we threw the confetti in there. Is that what you're going to do?
I may, now that you bring that idea to my attention. So that may be something I have
Your parents are probably my age, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I'm impressed that they're having a party on New Year's Eve.
Well, they just built this house, and they've been living in it now for a couple months, and they want to have people over. And
they want housewarming gifts.
No, they haven't had the housewarming party yet. They just want some people over to have fun, hang out.
They want housewarming
drinks.
gifts.
No,
this should serve as the housewarming New Year's party, right? Turn over a new leaf, new year, new house, new gifts, right? Your parents are smart, man.
I think they're saving that for the summer when they fully get settled down and moved in.
Well, then have 2 of them, right? One party you have, and people bring by the firewood, and another party you have, and they bring the outdoor furniture.
There you go.
Your parents are dumb like a fox, man. I'm going to be spending potentially spending New Year's Eve with one of our guests today.
Yeah, Jake, what are you doing on New Year's Eve?
Thank you for asking. I am going to be spending New Year's potentially with one of our guests from today. Would you like to guess which one?
Jeannie? Robin?
Robin won't leave, so that's entirely possible. But no.
One Bob Kravitz?
Bob Kravitz.
The translator? Or the
Bob
elixir?
Kravitz, when I went to, and I think I was doing this show, when I went to see Bruce Springsteen at Wrigley Field with my friend Michael Weir and Bob Kravitz. And Michael is the lead singer of The Elect. They are playing at the Slippery Noodle on New Year's Eve. And so, as they have done many years, because they're the best local band that there is. And so we are going to the Slippery Noodle for New Year's Eve to watch Michael. And I had told Bob when we went to Bruce Springsteen, you got to come on New Year's Eve to see Michael's band, because Michael was in the car with us. So I'm still trying to coerce Bob into that. So the majority of our conversation with Bob Kravitz today is not going to be about the Colts playoff chances or the Pacers defensively. It's going to be about trying to get him to the Slippery Noodle on New Year's Eve, right? That's my goal for today, to get Bob to commit. He is loosely committed.
You're looking for the close.
I'm looking for the close. Yes.
Right.
Like kind of like Eddie's parents. They invite you over for New Year's Eve, but they're really looking for a housewarming gift, right? They're looking to close on getting the few items left that they haven't necessarily secured for their house. They know what they're doing.
I do also, in terms of my New Year's Day docket, I want to give a shout out and a special thank you to Jamie Burns, the Pacers, the Fort Wayne Mad Ants. I will be on the call with Ron Howard with the Indiana Mad Ants. Now, I apologize. Yes, the Indiana Mad Ants. Be on the call 10 a.m. Little New Year's Eve game at Cambridge. So I'm looking forward to that. To working with Kelsey Casper and Ron Howard, everybody. So a special thank you to Dan Vance, Matt Scott, Jamie Burns, the whole crew.
Okay, so this will be the Indiana Mad Ants, right?
Yes,
it is the Indiana Mad Ants.
It is the Indiana Mad Ants. Yes, correct.
Do we know who they're playing yet?
We do.
Do you know?
They're playing the Birmingham Squadron, and it'll be they're playing them twice. So they'll play them the night before.
Oh, that's
Wednesday,
Dino night.
Friday night, and then Sunday.
That's Dino night, isn't it?
I believe so.
Okay, you will be on the call and people will hear and or see it where?
I believe it's NBAGleague.com, and they have a local airing of it for those that are in Birmingham. So if our company extends out that far, my 68 in Birmingham, you can get it over there. But GLeague.com, you get the broadcast.
The Birmingham Squadron, do you know their best player?
Birmingham's best player?
I'm looking at it right now. I'm just pulling it up.
No, I don't.
I'm looking to see if there's okay. Remember E.J. Liddell from Ohio State?
Yes, but I don't think he's on the active roster currently right now.
Has he been called up?
Yes. He has been called up. I know that from prep.
Oh, how about this? Glenn Robinson's son.
Yes. Now you're popping names back into my head because I have Houston? The boards. But yes.
This is exciting too. Matt Ryan. Ryan.
Yeah, right? Exactly. You're making all the jokes that I made last night.
I can tell you right now who Birmingham's leader in turnovers is. It's Matt Ryan, right?
You're making all the same jokes that I made yesterday.
Former Pacer Joe Young.
Is he really?
If it's the same one, let's double check.
I'm surprised he's still in the league, though. He's got to be.
Yep, that is Joe Young.
Wow, how old is he?
He was born in 92, so he is 31.
But I'm looking at their roster right now, and I don't see him listed. Is he? I mean, that's not to say he's not. Is he a two-way maybe?
I doubt it. I mean, he's played in all 14 of their games. Oh, hold on.
Uh-oh. Did he get punked by...
So, I went to the G League website, and he goes to the 2021 stats, not the 2023.
That goes back to Jake's larger issue with NBA stat access.
Now, the Birmingham Squadron, not to put you on the spot here, but I'm going to.
Sure, go ahead.
Here we go. They're the affiliate of the Pelicans, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, that's cool, man. That's very cool that you get to do that.
I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a fun time.
I mean, that is and you know, I think, and I want to make, you know, I think that people forget about the fact, Jimmy, that with the Mad Ants now playing here locally, I mean, it's a pretty good option. I can't imagine their tickets are outrageously expensive. Younger kids don't care either way. They just want to see high-level basketball. So it's pretty cool to have the team here and then eventually going to be up in Fishers where people can go watch them play.
That is the whole model that the NBA has shifted towards over the last 5 years. I had heard rumblings, because you obviously have the meetings out at Summer League and stuff like that. I'd heard rumblings that the Pacers were going to try to move the team for this is going on 5-6 years now because a lot of other teams are either relocating or, for some teams, for the first time, adopting an own independent G League team. When it was the developmental league for a long time, you have like 12 teams that would be shared by like 5 different franchises. And now the goal is for everybody to have a team that's relatively close to where the actual home NBA team is. And yeah, from a cost standpoint and from an efficiency standpoint, even right now when it's at Gamebridge, but especially when they're up in Noblesville next year, it's great. It's a good opportunity to stay connected with the fan base.
Absolutely. I'm not saying now, but I mean in particular when I was a kid, right? That would have been the thrill of a lifetime for me to go and see guys and probably get an autograph and maybe – I don't know if kids still do this, but when I was a young person going to games at Market Square when the old ramp on the far east side of the arena for the visiting team, I would stand out there for – I mean, I want to say hours. It was probably 45 minutes. I would stand and wait for shoes like there was no tomorrow, man.
Really?
Guys would always give out their shoes. I still have – my buddy Dave Steinberg and I got a pair of Gerald Wilkins shoes, and we split it. He signed both shoes and handed them to us, and we split it. I took the right. Dave took the left. I still have the shoe. I'm guessing Dave does not have his.
I was going to ask because that survived the purge then. Like that's an item that survived your cutdown a couple years ago.
As did Roy Henson's size 15 shoes. I have those somewhere. The other pair of shoes that I have, when the Pacers and Celtics were playing in the NBA playoffs, I was covering it in 05, 06, Reggie's last year. And I was late to shoot around, and Steven Jackson called me out on it, said, "Why are you late?" And being a smart aleck, I said, "Oh, I was out looking for a pair of Steven Jackson's signature shoes at the mall, and I couldn't find them anywhere, and that's why I'm late." He laughed, and the next day a ball boy came up and goes, "Here, Jack wanted me to give these to you," and I opened it up, and it was a pair of Steven Jackson's signature shoes. So I still have those as well. Those are the only shoes in my collection. The Colts, by the way, are back in action, getting set for the Las Vegas Raiders. We'll touch on that a little bit on the other side.
Hey, it's Kevin Bowen, and
Jimmy, I led off the show by asking on a scale of 1 to 10 your level of concern for your beloved Kansas City Chiefs, but we'll keep it local here by asking you this about the Colts. On a 1 to 10 scale, 10 being the most, 1 being not at all, your level of concern, I will say is the wrong word, the level of which you have to take seriously the Las Vegas Raiders now is what? I mean, obviously coming off of what did the Raiders do against Kansas City?
They largely what Las Vegas was able to do is Chiefs had some backup offensive linemen in, and the receiving room is what it is. They got after Mahomes early to the point that he already had trust issues with everybody else, that he was in a panic frenzy, not trusting receivers. Jake, Aiden O'Connell did not complete a pass for 3 quarters. They didn't score an offense. Like the reason that the Raiders were able to do what they did defensively and win that game is because Mahomes threw one of the worst passes that I've ever seen him throw on the pick six, and they got cute when they started to have momentum and led to a scoop and score fumble. Both those things happened within 30 seconds of one another.
Is Mahomes, and look, he's a Hall of Fame level player. Don't get me wrong. But is Mahomes having difficulty adjusting to not having the weapons for which he was so accustomed? And as a result of that, is he falling victim to trying to make plays that he got away with forever that are no longer there? And thus, it is making things like the Raiders defense look better than it is coming into Indianapolis.
No, I don't think it's that so much as we're at going into 17 now as an NFL pundits, fan base, whatever you want to call it, and there's no trust there. There's no trust within that wide receiver room. There's times where 2 or 3 times, and I get it, this is Indianapolis, no one cares about this, but for example, Marquez Valdez-Scantling is like wide open over the middle of the field, but Mahomes has made a clear decision he's not going to look there because there's a lack of trust. That's just like a one-off.
Right.
Like I think, yes, he is pressing to some extent because he feels like that he has to, but they won the Super Bowl last year with largely the same roster. The problem is they went cheap at wideout this year. They gambled. They made a couple long shot bets that did not pan out, didn't work. And again, they're still good enough, and he's still good enough to where, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me to see them there at the end on Super Bowl Sunday. But their margin for error is shrunk to such a point that they cannot make mistakes. They cannot turn the ball over. In regards to the Raiders, they're a fine team. I think Antonio Pierce has earned that job. I think he should be their full-time head coach. Max Crosby is an absolute animal. Everybody knows this. Like, he's one of the best defensive ends in all of the NFL. That said, offensively, Aiden O'Connell should not be the one to beat you. Watch out for Devontae Adams. Everything else, you're good.
And they have the ability to get after the quarterback a little bit, do the Raiders. But yesterday, Shane Steichen, Colts back on the practice field today. Of course, Julian Blackmon yesterday placed on IR. We told you about that. Shane Steichen then talked about the team that's coming in, talking about the Raiders of Las Vegas.
It'll be big. Obviously, they've been playing really good football as of late. Defensively, they play hard. They play together. Obviously, Max Crosby is a huge threat on defense, so we got to be alert for him where he's at. And then offensively, they got Devontae Adams, who's a heck of a player, and they're playing good football. So we got to be ready to go and be in our A game.
Dustin Dopirak. I got it right, didn't I? How about that?
Circle gets the square.
More on the Colts coming up in just a little bit. Dustin Dopirak is next.
The Colts today have given up 5 sacks.
Dustin Dopirak is the beat writer for the Indiana Pacers for the Indianapolis Star. He's also kind enough to join us on the program. And Dustin, thanks for the time. I'll get right to this. I was mentioning earlier. I don't know that I necessarily, in the moment, caught it. But then as I was watching last night against Houston, about, a couple of minutes after watching a lineup on the floor, I said to myself, they actually do have the capability, do the Pacers, of putting a defensive lineup on the floor. Problem is that compromises a little bit of their true brand, which is their offensive efficiency. But seems as though they're in the period of the year here where they're like, you know what, we're going to focus on the defensive end and then try to balance everything back out. Tell me what changes Rick Carlisle, who had talked about the possibility of changes being made, tell me what he's actually doing that is causing them to suddenly not give up 190 points a night.
Well, it's a few things. I think obviously last night they decided to go bigger, and so they had bigger lineups out there more frequently, even though Jalen Smith and Miles Turner didn't get to play together very much just because they were both in foul trouble. But obviously Isaiah Jackson, I thought, came in and did a really good job in his almost 20 minutes of filling in for those guys and giving them just some opportunity to not commit fouls. So obviously that's one thing, is just being more frequently deciding that you're going to have two of those bigs out there. It's not an all the time thing. Certainly, you're dealing the biggest problem that they've had is certainly defending those just really big and talented power forwards. LeBron James is the Giannis Antetokounmpos, Paolo Bancheros, Karl Anthony Towns is the world that are really big guys but also immensely skilled. And they've had a hard time stopping those guys. Aaron Nesmith has been the one guy who's been willing to kind of step in front of the moving trains, but that doesn't necessarily keep them from scoring. It just means he just gets knocked on his butt a lot, and he's defending with all manner of ferocity and whatnot, but you're 6'6", 215 and going against guys that are 250, 260, when you collide, you're going to fall backwards. So I think, it gives them a little bit more capacity to deal with at least the physical blows and maybe rebound a little bit better, that kind of thing. You don't necessarily have an answer for them because those guys can still go around them. But I think that helps. I think there's obviously been it's helped, obviously, the last couple games. They've played teams that aren't great offensive teams, that aren't lights out offensive teams, that don't have superstars at that position. And Memphis is a team that grinds you out. Orlando is a team that grinds you out. Houston is still young and figuring itself out. So that has helped. I think Andrew Nembhard's coming back has been really important. That's been really helpful. Even as you lost Bruce Brown, I think you've seen that Nembhard's a really is a really solid defender, keeps guys from getting moving. All that much at all. So I think that's been helpful. The bigger size, again, getting Nembhard back, I think it's been good having him in the starting lineup. They're going to have certain questions to ask when Bruce Brown gets back healthy. So I think those are kind of the key things that have really stood out. I think they've done a good job in second halves of sort of, waking up after they've given up a bunch has been, pretty useful. So I think that's made some difference. You're still in a position where you're giving up 115 a night and you're calling it a good day. And that's not necessarily, that doesn't make you a great defense, but they can, there has been some improvement. They can put together a decent defensive lineup, I think, out of this group. It's not going to be a great one, but if just get it out there for a little while and it's good enough to hang so that when you put out more offensive lineups, they can put a gap in it.
Speaking of collisions for Aaron Nesmith, he had kind of an ugly one last night with his teammate, little friendly fire with Jalen Smith, and I thought Jalen Smith was a little cobwebbed. He got up and shook it off. I don't think this is the case, Dustin, but I'll ask, was there any fallout from that, in terms of today or after the game, where they determined that maybe Smith in particular was more shaken up than was indicated?
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I wasn't on this trip, so I would have asked Rick Carlisle about that if I was in Houston, but I didn't. But I wasn't. So I think I definitely I had the same question. So, but I haven't seen anything yet to suggest that he's back in the protocol or anything like that. Certainly he was back on the bench shortly, and you would have thought if he was in the protocol, they would have kept him out for a while longer. I'm trying to think of I think when was it Miami? He went to the hospital after he got dinged up, and they didn't put him in the protocol for any longer than that. It's possible that it's a similar situation where he got his bell rung a little bit, but not enough to put him in the protocol. So it's certainly, I think, one to check out. Obviously, when the report comes out for tomorrow, later today, to see if he's on that list, but I haven't seen anything yet that suggests that he will be.
Pacers beat writer for the Indy Star, Dustin Dopirak, joins us. Dustin, we talked about this earlier, and Jake had mentioned it in that first question to you, that their ability to take away maybe what they're doing full speed offensively to lock in a little bit more defensively was more present in a successful manner last night against Houston than it was, say, 5 nights prior when they're in Memphis, when they kind of tried the same thing and it looked like, no, they have to go full speed. They cannot try to be a full-level defensive team. They don't have the firepower to do it. How much of that in hindsight now is because of, well, that was actually their 5th game in like 7 days, and fatigue matters, especially in this league, if you want to play good defense?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of, and also, first off, that definitely mattered. I mean, that there's no doubt that I think the entire cumulative effect. I mean, they kept getting asked about Las Vegas, and they sort of sidestepped that to say, well, we don't want to think about that and only be thinking about that. But it's like, it wasn't the fact that it was the in-season tournament. It's you tacked on, 4 or 5 days in Vegas onto a trip that was already, 4 games and 7 days on the road and crisscrossing time zones and all that kind of thing. And I think that the total, the total wear and tear, and then you come back and you've got the Clippers, right away as soon as you come back for a home game, and then you get Charlotte to ease back into it, but that's part of a back-to-back. When you go out to Memphis, and Memphis has Ja back, and on top of that, like there's a matchup piece to this as well. I mean, like they had a hard time getting running against Memphis because Memphis is really, really good at defending the interior. You got guys like Jaren Jackson and Xavier Tillman that make your life really hard in the middle, so they weren't getting a lot of points in the paint, and they were having to shoot a ton of threes and to try to make up for that. And again, they did have some they were a little bit dead legs, so those shots weren't going in. So it was a cumulative effect of a lot of things, plus matchup. Plus you go from from Memphis to Orlando, and those are two of the toughest, biggest, longest teams that you can deal with. So Houston is in a way sort of a breather, even though that's still a really good team at this point. So I think that there was a combination of those two things, and it's like, what do you have to do? How fast do you have to play to get what you need? You can play a little bit slower against a team that you can still score, get to the paint in the half court, where it's really tough to do that. When Memphis' defense is set, it's really tough to get into the teeth of that defense and score. Anytime they try to drive the basketball against them, they had a hard time getting buckets. It was a little bit easier last night for them to get that done, I think, what they end up with. And they obviously made some shots that helped them. They only had 44 in the paint. But 19 threes, goes a long, long way. It allows you to set your defense, all those kinds of things. So that there were a lot of, factors working in their favor last night that weren't working in their favor against Memphis and Orlando.
Justin, we know Tyrese Halliburton is a special player. He's shown that in kind of this coming out party season over the stretch of just not even half the year, basically just past the Christmas Day games. That stretch in Vegas, it became an expectation of, well, he's not going to turn the basketball over. Like, it is a bad night for him if he has even one turnover listed on the box score. I feel like now, when you look at his entire career and you look at what's happened the last 3 or 4 games, the number is probably 3, maybe 4, but more than that, then you should be panicky about, that's a bad night for Tyrese. Do you see it that same way? Is that a fair bar for him in terms of where they should see a good night versus a bad night taking care of the basketball?
Yeah. I think when you're handling the ball that much and you're making that many passes, 3 is probably okay. You're going to miss fire sometimes. That's probably a fair number. Now, he's not okay with that. I mean, I think right. He was in the midst of talking kind of through his just with Saturday night against Orlando. He's like, man, I've really been hurting us lately. I've been terrible. He's like, my turnover numbers are terrible lately. And it was at 4-4. I think he had 3 against Orlando, 4 against Memphis. I'm looking at his basketball reference page. I don't know this off by heart, but 4 against Memphis, 4 against Charlotte, 4 against the Clippers. He had 7 against the Pistons in that win. So I mean, I think he feels like that's a little bit high for him. I think he'll live with 2. But certainly likes to stack nights when he's getting zeros. I think he obviously had, 0 against Boston, 1 against Milwaukee. He's had so many other great games where it was 1 or 0. I mean, I think I'm looking at the stretch here. Yeah, he had 0 against Boston, 0 against Milwaukee. So those back-to-back games, no turnovers. 2 against Miami, and when he had 44 even in the loss. I think it's reasonable to say, okay, 3 or 4 is where he should be. If you're having the ball in your hand that much, you're passing the ball that much, there's going to be a few misfires over the course of a whole basketball game. But he thinks there should be fewer than that, and that's obviously why he's capable of every once in a while having a night where he has 15 assists and no turnovers.
Dustin, is Jarris Walker I know it's really early, don't get me wrong, but so far from what we've seen, is he a defensive tweener? And by that I mean maybe I just misunderstood what kind of his role was going to be. Probably that's the case. But at 6'7", he would lack the height probably to get overly physical on the low block with somebody. But he also seemingly, does he have the lateral quickness to guard and be a wing defender? Which sort of, he was touted defensively, which sort of defensive player is he?
I think defensive, like when he puts all the tools together, he can be a guy that can do both because he's got a lot of length to him. I got to look back at his combine numbers as far as wingspan is concerned. But as I recall correctly, his wingspan measured humongous. I mean, it was really big. Plus, he's got a significant amount of bulk, muscle, like all that kind of stuff. Like he can defend bigger than 6'7". I think that's one thing to point out. And I think so for the most part. If you imagine him, fully put together and he knows what he's doing on defense, you can see the mound of clay looks like somebody that you could put up against some of these bigger fours. Like in theory, he really fits that mold. I think Caitlin Cooper obviously does a phenomenal job with the X's and O's stuff that she does. She keeps saying that like he is a defender in theory as much as better than he is in reality at this point. In reality, he's 20, and I think even when we talked to Kevin Pritchard on not draft night, lottery night, we asked him, are you going to go for defense? Do you view it as, this is your opportunity to get a guy who really fits that mold? And we were thinking of Walker when we were asking the question. And he was like, you can only ask so much of a rookie as a defensive player because they're just going to figure out how the game's called, how it's referees, what's a foul, what's not, how to deal with some of these superstars. So, like, you can't draft a guy for defense and expect that as a rookie he's going to make an impact. Again, this is before he even had Walker. He wasn't even mentioning names that night. He wouldn't even speak Victor Wembanyama's name out loud, even though he wasn't able to draft him. Like, that's kind of still how he was thinking already. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised that at this point, at 20, he's not quite there yet. Obviously, we talked a little bit to Rick Carlisle about him last week when he was down at G League and did a really good job at the showcase in Orlando, and he was just talking about defense and what Rick said he's got to make sure that he's being more steady, more disciplined than his instincts want him to. I asked, well, what do you mean by that? He said, stop making willy-nilly gambles, and we talked to Walker about that. He says, yeah, there was one play that I saw on Twitter basically that like, he sees the basketball and he has to reach for it. And it's like, okay, like that, you can't do that in the NBA. You might have been able to get away with that at Houston. You might have been able to get away with that in IMG, just with all the length you had to stick your hand in there. I mean, even like one of the first plays down at the Summer League, he picked Bilal Coulibaly's pocket. I mean, that really stood out to me as what he could do, but he is gambling. And there was a scenario where he reached and the guy went right, of the opening he created by reaching, and he went and scored a layup that way. And so I think that's kind of where he is. You need to figure out, he needs to get his mind right as a defender and understand what he can and can't do, and stop making the gambles that he used to make that used to turn into steals and now turn into layups against him before you can really get a sense of what he can be defensively. Again, it's one of those things where you got to remind yourself every once in a while, some of these guys, they come in their 20, you have this expectation because some guys have really been successful as rookies. You forget some of them take a couple years, to get right and till you find out what they can really be as a defensive player. And it might take them some time, but I think you saw a lot of good progress from him if you got to watch any of the G League showcase games, especially offensively. It's come a long way. So he's not that far off, and it's not a situation where you look at him and say, well, okay, this is just not going to be what he was picked to be, but it's going to be a while before he is what they envisioned.
Dustin, I'm not saying that the Indianapolis Star would be thrilled with your participation in a gambling game around a team that you cover, but we're gonna do a hypothetical here, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You and I go out to Las Vegas together, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, if we're gonna go out to Vegas together, guys trip, where do you want to stay? First off, that's a big question. What place would you want to stay? I'll pop. Where do you want to stay?
Anywhere. Okay, just anywhere on the Strip. I'm good with.
Okay.
I mean, I was at the Hilton Garden Inn last
Okay,
night,
so we're going to stay at. The Venetian's nice, Bellagio's nice, but I thought Paris was cool when I stayed there, so we'll stay at Paris. Okay.
All right.
So down in the lobby of Paris, we're going to get some croissants, and there's a gambling game taking place, and it is the following: we're going to have a draft, and we are going to draft players that if that player is traded by the Pacers at the trade deadline, then you are going to get a free trip to return to Vegas, okay? So your goal here is that you want to have players that you're drafting in a little fantasy draft that get moved. I draft first, and I draft Benedict Mathurin. Now, when I draft him, are you thinking to yourself, I am so happy he drafted him because that is such a dumb pick. There's no way they're going to trade Mathurin. Jake is an idiot, and this gives me a perfect first-round pick to make. And if you think that, who is your first-round pick?
I mean, I am the most safe of safe gamblers when I have ever gambled, which is very rare. But I would take Buddy just because that seems like the obvious move. But I could easily see, like, you take him, and I'm like, you might be wrong, but you could be right. You know, that's kind of where I'm at. I think what we would say to this is this: Benedict Mathurin certainly is the most valuable piece they could conceivably move. As far as who would do the best on the market, who would bring in the biggest return, and therefore who could you package, with, who would be the centerpiece of a package that gets you an all-star caliber player. I think that's the guy who gets you closest to that. If you want a Pascal Siakam or somebody at that level, certainly we don't really have a sense of who's going to open up yet. Lauri Markkanen, if you want Lauri Markkanen, you probably have to move Benedict Mathurin. If you're looking for somebody who's going to be a big wing, a big power forward that can score and can defend at least a little, but turns into that number 2 guy with Halliburton, sometimes your number 1 guy. You're going to have a hard time getting in him if you're not moving. Mathurin certainly makes it easier. I mean, could you package Shield together with draft picks and get it? Maybe, but I think that's going to be difficult. You're going to have to pair several first to get a player of that caliber. So I'm not saying Jake's an idiot, but I am saying as the IndyStar beat writer, man, that would be a really shakeup if he's right.
Okay.
That would be a big deal.
How about Obi Toppin?
So you like in this case, you just got to he's just got to move. I think that's certainly more possible. I don't think they're going to rush out the door to get rid of him. They're not going to just try to move him just to move him. They certainly like what he's done with Halliburton. They definitely don't view him as a useless piece. But certainly, I think he has increased his value. I think by what he's done. Obviously, still not a great defensive player, but as lob finisher, as just finisher at the rim, he's been everything they could have hoped for and more. I mean, I think he's had a couple of rough nights, but if I call him up right here, he's probably at like 75% of his twos or something crazy like that. So I think they're certainly not going to view him as at least bit untouchable. They might move him for something else that they see that more fits, that might be more defensive oriented wing. But or again, like he might just fit as part of a greater package. But he certainly could be on the move. He's certainly a safer bet to move than Mathurin is.
Dustin, if the season ended today, and it feels like we're having that conversation with the Colts because they're on the doorstep, the Pacers still have so many more games left to go before we get to that point. But if it did, they'd be a play-in team. We're 30 games in nearly. How much more do you and the Pacers need to see before, to build off of Jake's question, we figure out if they're buyers, sellers, or just standing pat at the deadline, which is less than 2 months away?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you look at the standings now. I mean, they're a game and a half back of Cleveland for 7th, 2 games back of the Knicks for 6th, 2.5 back of the Heat for 5th. I mean, all of this, everybody from Orlando on down at 4 is pretty tightly packed. You're starting to see the separation that you were expecting to see from Boston and Milwaukee and to Philadelphia to some extent. Obviously, everybody's still close. Everybody's within 8 games, and that's not an insurmountable amount of space to make up. But I mean, I think you get the sense that Boston and Milwaukee are out in the front, and everybody else is a little bit behind them. Philly's kind of in its own space, on their own, kind of chasing them, and then there's really the rest of the pack. I mean, I'd have a hard time imagining that they're going to hit the seller's point. I have a hard time seeing the bottom falling out, so they're below Chicago. I don't think they're going to. I think they view it as important to get this team in postseason one way or the other. So I don't see them tanking. I guess that's the bottom line point. It has to be really bad. They have to be, I think, forced to say that they're not even going to play for the play-in. That I think is their hand will have to be forced for them to be out of that. So if they're even within striking range of 10th in February, I think they're going to be buyers. So that I have, it really has to fall out of it for them to be sellers. I'm sorry. So I think they're going to be in at least buy position. But, their level of ability to take risks certainly is going to be governed by how high up they are. If they can move up a couple, if they can get on a winning streak, here and get back into, being sixth. I think certainly sixth is, I think, their main goal is to get out of a play-in scenario. I think they just view that this team has to find a way to get into a 7-game playoff series. And even if they go one and done there, even if they get, blitzed 4-1, 4-0. They just have to get a sense of it. This young team has to figure out what it's like to be in playoffs and then go from there. So I think if they're holding steady at 500, I think they're going to at least try to make a play to move up, and they will buy more than they will sell, even if they're still in that position. They'll certainly be more willing to take risks the higher up the ladder they are. But a lot has to go wrong for them to not at least try to buy at the deadline.
I think staying at the Hilton Garden Inn is kind of a smart play, to be honest with you. Because
it was smart until I figured out it was on the other side of the freeway. I had to take an Uber to the arena every day. And it was 0.3 miles away. I was staring at it, but I couldn't get across.
That's a bit of a buzzkill. But here's the thing. If you're going to go to Vegas, like everybody gets so excited about where are you staying? And it's like, how often – I mean, you're never – any of those casinos, Dustin, any of them, for people that have never been to Las Vegas, you hear about like, the Luxor, the Paris, the Bellagio, the Venetian, the and the Mirage. Once you're in the depths of one of those casinos, they're all the same.
Yes.
Right? And I guess if you're there in the dead of summer, it's nice because you have pool access. But if you're going right now, you go and you walk up and down the strip or whatever else, and then to be honest with you, by the time you're like totally worn out, it's kind of nice to get away from all that and just crash out for 8 hours. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. The one thing that was – so the last time I stayed in a casino was we did Treasure Island. It was my buddy Brett's bachelor party. And the one thing that was really nice about it, it was like they have a CVS in Treasure Island where you can buy beer at a normal price, 6-packs and whatnot. So I'd like take a 6-pack up to my room, have a beer to walk around with, not have to spend $10 a beer.
Now, do they still have the pirate ship battle at Treasure Island?
I think they do. We didn't see that, but I'm sure they do. Yeah, I mean, they have that out front and everything, so they must. I mean, how would you get rid of that? So, but yeah, no, but the nice thing about Hilton Garden Inn was like you come home at the end of the night and there's not a casino that you have to walk through. You just walk up, you go to bed, you wake up in the morning, and it's not there. So that's peaceful, and so it's like you get to separate from that and then go back to it if you want to. So there's good and bad about it, but it would have been a lot nicer if I realized that the 0.3 mile distance was not 0.3 miles is a freeway.
Yeah, 0.3 miles in Vegas can be 10 miles for sure, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Dustin, appreciate it, man. If we don't talk to you, have a very happy New Year, all right?
Absolutely. Same to you guys. Thanks so much.
All right. Again, Dustin, Dopirak.
Second one.
Dopirak.
Nope, that was the first one.
Dopirak.
There it is.
Are you sure about that?
Yes.
I don't know why it's – eventually I'll get this right.
Dopirak.
But then I always say – I know it's Dopir, but then I'm like, so is it Dopirak or Dopirak?
Those both sounded the same, that one that you just
Dopirak or Dopirak?
Oh, you're asking where to go up or go down.
Yeah.
Dopirak.
So, actually, excuse me, he nailed it there because – so you've been to Vegas, right, Jimmy?
I have.
You've stayed where? Give me that. How many times have you been to Las Vegas?
4 times. I've stayed at MGM Grand. I've stayed at the Park. I've stayed at the Palm.
Okay.
Which is the Palm's.
So you stayed at one of them twice, obviously.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Because let's be real, for most people, unless you go there a lot and you have like the loyalty to a casino that comps you, for most people you're going to stay whichever place has like the best special or rates at the time you're booking it, right? Eddie, you have been to Las Vegas how many times?
Twice.
You stayed where?
The Paris and New York.
Oh, you decided to go 2 cities, huh?
One more I forgot. On a work trip, we were at the Vidara. I believe that's how you say it. It's near the Cosmopolitan.
Is that off-site? Is that off the strip?
It's on.
Okay. So I've been – the first time that I went to Vegas, I went by myself. I had one of those like round-trip airfare vouchers to use, and I had forgotten about it. And I was like, oh, my gosh, this expires in like 6 weeks. I was in my early 20s. So I just went by myself. I had no money. I stayed at I think it's called Holiday Inn Boardwalk.
Nice.
like at the end of the strip.
Sure.
But I was like, I just need a room, right?
Right, yeah.
I was by myself. It was fine. I've stayed at the Rio. I've stayed at the Paris. I've stayed at – for IndyCar when we were there, and it was not a good trip in Vegas, we stayed at a new resort that was off-strip. I can't even remember the name, but it starts with an A. I'm trying to think of where else I've stayed. At any rate, we are going in February. We are going to see – I can say this now.
Oh,
you
that's
guys know
right.
this. But we're going to go see U2 at the Sphere.
Was she excited?
She was. Shannon loves U2. I don't.
Oh, how sweet of her.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's right. I know you love Shannon also, Eddie, so it works out well. She loves the band U2. And so when Rick Carlisle was on with KB and Andy a couple weeks ago, he had mentioned that when the Pacers were out there in Vegas, they went to go see U2 in the Sphere. And so I was talking to somebody else within the organization and said, yeah, it was pretty amazing. And then a buddy of mine, Billy Lewis, went and saw it for like on a guy's trip and did the same thing. And he's like, dude, it's unbelievable. It was not easy to get tickets, but anyway, I got tickets for us to go to U2 in the Sphere. And then in looking at hotels, the Sphere is essentially attached to the Venetian. But the Venetian that weekend, there must be something going on at the Venetian because it was like $1,000 a night for a room. And I'm like, come on. It's across the street from Treasure Island. And Treasure Island had like a special that it was really affordable. The tickets for the concert were not necessarily. So that's where we're staying is Treasure Island. So I'll give you guys a full update on nothing like staying at a place that probably had its heyday like 40 years ago.
Well, according to Derek Schultz, we need to see your W-2 from IndyCar because you make a lot of money as a turn announcer.
Well, we're in the off season, Eddie. We're in the off season, right? So, I had to save those shekels away in order to be able to do it, right?
That's true.
I don't have that coming in, but I'm trying to think of the name of the place we stayed. Is it Aria? Maybe it was a new like resort way off the strip when IndyCar was out in Vegas, but that's been 10 years ago. So, the funny thing about Vegas is every time –
that is a Vegas hotel, by the way. Aria is a place.
Is it? Okay. Maybe that was what it was. But the funny thing about Vegas is every time you go, there's a new like –
right.
They're either building one or it's like that's the new one that just opened and like it's all about – I'm trying to think of the one last time I was in Vegas – they were just completing one that that was going to be the new state-of-the-art, whatever else. First time I went, Bally's was a big one for a while there, which I thought was a health club. And then I think one time when we went, Shannon and I went for a wedding. I think I told you guys. And she actually was the one that was like, let's just stay off the strip and get out of the way. And we stayed at a place called Tuscany. And I'm telling you right now, if anybody's listening and they're thinking about going to Vegas to do like a show or something like that, and you want to basically save money for a hotel that is really nice, but just one block off the strip, but you're going to pay like a third for the hotel, Tuscany was basically like a courtyard. Like you have kind of like your own little kitchenette, whatever else. It was super nice, super clean, and took you 2 minutes to walk to the strip. And then once you're on the strip, you're right in the heart of things. And it was cool. I enjoyed it. Back to the Colts. We'll get into that, including some comments from Shane Steichen talking about the Raiders. We'll get a little bit deeper into that because Eddie was in here until 4 o'clock in the morning putting all of this audio together. So I figure it would only be kind that we actually let people hear it because it's pretty good stuff. We'll do it next.
They say
Marvin Harrison, Edgerrin James, Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathis. Actually, I guess I'm trying to think if all those guys were here. Reggie Wayne might not have been in this game, but and Freeney may not have as well. But certainly Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison, Edgerrin James. When the Colts had a game against the Raiders at home and afterwards talked to basically no media. None, zero. Because the Colts and Raiders had a game at the then RCA Dome, and about midway through it, the word leaked from everybody and their brother that, in fact, Bob Knight was about to be fired. So all of the media that was covering that game got pulled from it and headed over to the IUPUI campus to a hotel there where there was a press conference taking place, and literally it was like John Clayton and like these NFL writers that were all like, I don't know, they just pulled me and sent me over here. And meanwhile, the game was ending. I think the Raiders actually won, and no one was there because the story was the Bob Knight story. But big topic of conversation is obviously going to be, from the Colts standpoint, I think defensively, coming off the Atlanta game in particular, you know, it is interesting that when the Colts defense plays well, people are like, man, these guys are making plays. Dio's making plays, and Kwity Paye's finally arrived, and Zaire Franklin is Zaire Franklin. And then when they have games where they struggle, it's all on Gus Bradley. Gus Bradley's an idiot. Fire Gus Bradley. They got to get rid of Gus Bradley. It's never the players, right? But it is true that there have been games where their pass rush, which Chris Ballard has preached a lot, there have been games where that has been a real key part of what they've tried to do. And then there have been games where you're like, what happened to the pass rush? Where are these guys? You know, is that scheme or what is it? Gus Bradley was asked on Colts Roundtable and to discuss the fact that some games the pass rush is feast, some games the pass rush is famine.
Looking back at the last couple of games or when we didn't play well, you know, the backs have come alive against us. You know, Cincinnati, it was the screen game. You know, this past game, you know, Robinson did a good job. Both backs did a good job against us. We gave up some explosive plays, whether it was, you know, them catching balls and, you know, on passes, screen game, or, you know, on some of the runs. So I think that's the common thread right now that we have to take care of, is slowing down these running back type plays that are getting yards against us.
Now, key for that, and Jimmy, you watched the Raiders a lot, obviously, against the Kansas City Chiefs. And Aiden O'Connell is not a guy that necessarily terrifies you. There's no doubt about that, because he's still kind of feeling his way through, if you will. But when you're talking about teams that, as Gus Bradley was mentioning right there, try to gas you and keep you uncomfortable in terms of having to not necessarily gamble with the rush because they can hit you with screens, they can hit you out of the backfield. You know, the reality is, I realize that the Chiefs made White look like a really good running back, 6.5 yards per carry. But without Jacobs there, it doesn't seem like necessarily, although maybe they do rely a little bit on their backfield and those screen passes because of the fact that O'Connell, you know, they're still trying to keep him comfortable there. So maybe it's a little bit of a catch-22. You want to rattle O'Connell, but at the same time, you got to be honest, because he's reliant on, and they're going to utilize a lot, those guys out of the backfield, whether or not you consider them to be mainline threats coming out of the backfield behind him.
Yeah, I mean, it hadn't been a reoccurring appearance this year for Kansas City to just get gashed by opposing running backs. I mean, that's still an area that's probably their weak point in terms of they're a high-quality pass defense team, but that's not something that I would have expected necessarily from Zamir White. Again, as you mentioned, 6 yards a carry, nearly 7 yards a carry throughout that ball game. I don't want this to sound oversimplistic, but it's going to. Offensively speaking, there is one read that Aiden O'Connell is going to make if he knows pressure is there, and that is, where is Devontae Adams, and is it man-to-man look? Throw the ball up there and give him a chance. If you are able to take Adams out of this game, which Kansas City did, albeit, again, The Raiders didn't have to throw a ton, but O'Connell went 9 of 21, and they largely relied on the running game because they are not a good offensive team. If you watch out for Devontae Adams, you're going to be fine from a defensive standpoint. Offensively speaking, and I will give the Raiders credit, and this is why, again, if I am the Davis family and I am looking at this, I would want to give Antonio Pierce a shot to be the full-time guy. Defensively, Max Crosby and Malcolm Kuntz, they are phenomenal. They are a two-headed monster as you have both of them on the either side of the ball getting pressure. Everybody knows about Crosby, but the last 2 games, Kuntz has been sensational to the point they're able to do stunts. They're able to confuse offensive linemen to the point that it's 1, 2, oh, there's a guy in the backfield now. What do I do with this football? That is the bigger thing for me. And not to say the Colts don't have big struggles defensively, because we know that they do. The loss of Michael Pittman Jr. this past week was a prime example of one too many weapons in an offense that already lacks playmakers, and we knew that from the start of the season. It's a bridge too far. Like, I don't know offensively if the Colts are going to be able to get done what they want to get done the rest of this stretch, which is the final 2 games, to avoid disappointment yet again and missing the playoffs without Michael Pittman Jr. I really don't.
You know, the other side of it for the Colts would be in terms of their own running game and things out of the backfield for Gardner Minshew, who Gardner Minshew, when he has played well, has been really good. Gardner Minshew at other times obviously leaves you a little be desired. But Shane Steichen knows now that he's got kind of a luxury of riches in the backfield, perhaps, because Jonathan Taylor is back in the mix. And then you have, on top of that, of course, the fact that the guys that have played behind him have played well. So Shane Steichen on what he now thinks about a backfield that gives him versatility in terms of his options.
Yeah, we obviously Goody and Trey did a good job the week before, and then getting Jonathan back was good. But yeah, it was just kind of like, obviously it was tough sledding for us running the football there, and so we were rotating those guys in. But again, like you know how it is, if someone's got a hot hand, we'll ride that hot hand, and obviously it wasn't going our way last Sunday, and this week we got to get back on track.
Game script dictates a lot of that.
I would agree with that, and just kind of getting it. One thing I'll say about Steichen. There are always – when I was a kid, I've always mentioned the fact I was a diehard IU basketball fan. And in 1989, which was a great season for IU basketball, it was the Jay Edwards miracle year. Indiana won the Big Ten. They swept Michigan. My dad won season tickets by having his business card pulled out of a fishbowl at the Noble Romans at 71st and Bedford. Unbelievable, right? So I went to every game. And during the course of games at Assembly Hall, there were so many times that I would sit up there. I was 16 years old, so like I'm at the peak of sports fandom. Our seats were like 17 rows up. And I'd be sitting there with my dad watching the game, and I'd be a nervous Nelly because Indiana's down 4 with 7 minutes to go to Michigan State or Michigan or whatever it might be. And I would look down at Bob Knight on the sidelines, and say what you want about Bob Knight, but I'd look down at Bob Knight, and I had this great feeling of peace because I'm like, he's going to be able to pull something out of a hat here. And he is thinking a step ahead of everybody else. He's seeing the game differently. Now some of that might have been just branding that I thought that, but it's the reality of the way that I thought as a fan. Shane Steichen is a young head coach. And nobody, by any stretch of the imagination, is ready to immediately appoint him as the next Vince Lombardi. But he does have about him that same demeanor where you kind of get the feeling that he is seeing the game in a different way than we, the fan, and that he is kind of a step ahead. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that he has the acumen of a Hall of Fame level coach at this point, but he does have, Jimmy, kind of this demeanor about himself where he seems – the moment does not seem too big for him. And as a player, I would think that is very soothing and calming. That when things get tense, you look down and you got this coach that's like kind of even keel, kind of a cool customer, and just a football nerd, quite frankly, that is just doesn't really care about anything else but then just watching the game and calling the game. And, and are we seeing to some extent the impact that he has as a coach in the way Philadelphia is playing right now? Maybe. But you're also, it's going to be easy as well if the Colts lose their last 2 games to then go, the rookie coach, he didn't know what to do down the home stretch. I mean, it's obviously an important time, but I do like his demeanor. I do like his approach. I do like his control of the situation. If you're a Colts fan, I think you've got to find some kind of soothe in that. But Shane Steichen is well aware of the fact that this is a critical, obviously, stretch for the Colts where they put themselves in position. Kudos to them. They've shot themselves in the foot a few times to put themselves in position to have these 2 games be oh so critical and nothing guaranteed. But the other side of that is, if you are an optimist, you look at it and go, at the beginning of the year, whoever would have thought heading into New Year's Eve in the final 2 weeks of the year that the Colts were in position to put themselves in position. And Shane Steichen is well aware of what's on the line and the way they've got to play in these last 2 games.
I think offensively, we got to have good drives. Obviously, starting on 1st and 10 and not put ourselves in 2nd and long situations, 3rd and long situations, and we got to create explosive plays. Usually we've done a good job of creating some explosives. We didn't get that done last week. And then defensively we got to tackle better there and not give up the explosives, bottom line, and stop the run. And I feel confident that we'll get that done this week.
Ignore the fact that the potential franchise QB or the quarterback they believe to face the franchise has missed basically the whole year, which we knew that, right? That's not a new piece of information, but you've known that. That's why the conversation when the Colts were winning is, maybe Shane Steichen deserves some Coach of the Year considerations. Look at what he's been able to do. If you were ever in that boat, and I was, when you critique the 2023 Indianapolis Colts, and yes, you need to let these final 2 games play out, the blame should not be placed on Shane Steichen. 2 things in my mind of where you blame, and 1 you can't because it's just bad luck. Injuries, and then what he was given to work with as a coach. And yes, we're talking about Chris Ballard in that regard. When Michael Pittman Jr. went down, and that's my point to just one offensive weapon taken away too much for regardless how good a coach you are, it's going to be tough sledding. These are players that caught passes for the Colts this past weekend. Kylen Granson, Will Mallory, Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, Tyler Goodson, DJ Montgomery. Of those names, 1, maybe 2 are players that I would like to have significant roles for the Colts next year. That's where you're at this stretch when you take Michael Pittman Jr.
We're going to disagree on one of them. Give me the names again. I'm going to write them down because there's one of them. I'm going to predict who your guy is. But you go ahead. Give me those names again.
Kylen Granson.
Okay.
Will Mallory.
Okay.
Josh Downs.
Okay.
Alec Pierce.
Okay.
Tyler Goodson.
Okay.
DJ Montgomery.
Okay. There are.
And you said only 2 of those guys.
Only 2 would I feel yes, 100%. I want you on the roster next year.
Okay, we're going to disagree on one
There's
of them.
Then, 4
and I think,
for me.
I think Eddie and I are on the same page on 1.
Okay, you're at 4 though.
Josh Downs and Alec Pierce are a given, right?
Yes.
Let
me tell you the guy that I think. You play fantasy football?
I do.
You ever draft a guy in fantasy football that you read about in some magazine at Kroger during the checkout line, and it said, here's your secret weapon. This guy's going to really mesh well with his quarterback.
You're taking me back to middle school with the checkout line magazine.
So you draft him, right?
They still have magazines at Barnes & Noble, by the way, at checkout. Or fantasy football.
Sorry, you're reading it online, whatever. You get my point.
Yes.
And so you draft some receiver from the Arizona Cardinals, and everybody's like, why did you draft that guy? And yet you keep him on your roster the whole time because you're waiting for the time when all of a sudden, in fact, he starts to bond with Kyler Murray, and everybody goes, oh, my gosh, Jimmy was a genius when he took that guy in the 9th round.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay.
One of those guys you mentioned is that guy for the Colts. There is a player for the Colts that they drafted because they were intrigued by his skill set. They've kind of waited and allowed him to slowly acclimate into the offense. And when his number has been called, he has shown them something that is a different wrinkle than the other players in his position room. And he might be, when they had Dwayne Allen and Kobe Fleener, Fleener was basically seen as a tight end that was a receiver, and Allen was seen as a tight end that was a blocker that could make you a short catch. they are going to need a tight end that is a blocker. I think at this point with Jelani Woods has been hurt all year because apparently he was a little bit out of shape, or at least that's the word. I'm not saying definitively that's the case, but that's been kind of the buzz. Mo Alley Cox, at this point, I think we know what Mo Alley Cox is. Kylan Granson and Drew Ogletree both kind of got their chances to really show if they could be breakout guys. The player in that mix that I think they are slowly starting to acclimate more because they feel he is a tight end that can be, I'm not saying Dallas Clark level, but a yard after catch, extend plays tight end is Will Mallory. And I think Will Mallory is increasingly becoming a guy that they are looking more towards in terms of his future stock to see what they can do out of him. And I like what he has shown.
I don't hate that. I don't. I like Mallory. And there would be a time where if you asked me and put Truster a minute, of the two, and you made me only pick two, it's Josh Downs and either Mallory or Pierce.
Mallory is the one tight end that when he has been called upon has shown you a little more than what you expected out of him, and you go, ooh, there might be something here. Everybody else, you go, yeah, that's about what I thought.
The larger point with that is, though, and focusing more on the wide receivers than the tight ends, not that they are important, because it'd be nice to have a clear tight end number one or majority of the snap tight end in 2024. My larger point is this is not the receiving room, even if you keep Michael Pittman Jr., that needs to be around Anthony Richardson in 24 is my larger point.
See, I would disagree because I think Alec Pierce fits right into what you want to do with Anthony Richardson.
I would agree with that. Long ball threat behind the defense.
And plus, it's going to be a 50-50. You're going to get a catch 50% of the time. You're going to drop. And, of course, there's the always added in defensive pass interference call that's going to get mixed in there as well. He's really good at that.
If it's Michael Pittman Jr., Josh Downs, and Alec Pierce are your three wide receivers, I don't care how good Anthony Richardson is, you're capped at what you can do. Somebody else needs to be in here offensively for this team. It
Bob
needs to be an
Kravitz,
overcorrection.
by the way, going to join us in 10. Hey there, it's Jake Query from The Fan with some fantastic news from I never liked this song. People love the video. I think this is probably the biggest one-hit wonder of the 80s, is it not? Putting on the Ritz by Tacos up there. I realize I'm asking the wrong audience here.
Yeah, you're speaking to the. I mean, I know this song. I don't take on me, but you were speaking to the masses.
There are a lot of there are some songs that people are like, oh man, that's a great one-hit wonder, and it's like, well, they actually had a couple other hits. Like Flock of Seagulls had 2 hits, maybe 3. Everybody thinks of I Ran So Far Away, but Space Age Love Song was also a huge hit, or at least a moderate hit.
It was Eddie's ringtone for a while.
Probably was, right? I think Modern English with Melt With You was pretty big, and I think that's a better song. When I went and saw Modern English, I don't know, a couple months ago I think I mentioned it, they knew going into it, like he said right off the top, yeah, we know everybody's here for one song. It's like, which you got to respect, right?
Yes. I still think that the troll move is to say, we're not playing it. And then everybody's like, oh, and then play it at the end.
Right.
Everybody's
like,
oh, hey, they did it. That's great.
Michael Weir, who's my buddy from The Elect, went and saw Bruce Springsteen with Bob Kravitz at Wrigley Field. Bob's going to join us next. Michael has promised me that if Bob comes to the Slippery Noodle for New Year's Eve, that they will do Bruce Springsteen covers. Now, I don't know that I'm going to be able to coerce Kravitz out of his house on New Year's Eve. But, I mean, think about it. New Year's Eve, Slippery Noodle, The Elect Indie. I mean, what more is there, right? There was nothing better than a couple of years ago when Clemson was in the national semifinals and they beat I'm trying to think of who they beat. Oh, would have been Oklahoma or no, Ohio State maybe. But knowing that they were already in the championship game.
Yeah, they beat Fields.
And then going, what's that?
Is that when they beat Justin Fields?
Yeah, but I don't think that game was on New Year's Eve. One of the New Year's Eve, I think it was the Oklahoma year when they beat Oklahoma. And they blew Oklahoma off the field, and then Alabama beat Michigan State. So we went to go to the Slippery Noodle to see The Elect on New Year's Eve, and the Alabama-Michigan State game was playing in the background, and I'm watching The Elect playing knowing Clemson's work's already done, and they're already in the championship game. And it was awesome, and then they went to the championship game, and they allowed a 4th down play for Alabama, a tight end slant. And
Beer on draft?
Beer on draft, of course. Can't do the bottles, man. Can't do the bottles. Has to be on draft. Bob Kravitz going to join us next.
The Colts today have given up 5 sacks. The Falcons.
Wednesday that feels like a Tuesday. So good news, folks. You are just a couple days away from a 3-day weekend to ring in 2024. Joining us now on the hotline, he, of course, longtime Indianapolis media member. You can read all of his work on Substack. And in addition to that, follow him, of course, on X Twitter. Bob Kravitz joins us. Bob, I'm going to get right to the Pacer game. We've been talking about it a lot from last night. You know, Rick Carlisle had talked about and discussed the possibility that they were going to have to do something different defensively. And you touched on it going into that game, that lineup changes might be in order. And I thought last night they were pretty good defensively, especially comparatively speaking to the way they've been in the past.
Well, really, the last 4 games, they've been 19th in the league in defense, which sounds pretty humble, but for them is quite a step up. But, yeah, I asked Rick after they gave up 74 points to the Orlando Magic in the first half. On Saturday, I said, are you thinking about making some changes? And he kind of looked at me like my wife usually looks at me, like I'm completely crazy. And by God, he made a switch. And I think they're a better team. They're a better starting group with Neesmith and Nembhard. And Jalen Smith, for that matter. The problem you have then is with the bench, because you don't have as good a defense with the bench. So, you gain a little bit and you lose a little bit. But I thought they played very well last night, and I like to see that lineup play a couple of games and see what they're all about.
I thought last night Isaiah Jackson gave him really good minutes. Jalen Smith did as well. And they offer a little bit, especially if they're out there with Turner, one of the two. They offer a little bit there. Question is, Bob, is the defense, like, can they, the Pacers, maintain their offense, and the brand of their offense is what was making them unique. Right. And yet it was coming at the cost of their defense. Can they ramp their offense back up if, in fact, they're having to commit this much defensively?
Well, that's a good question. I would think there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to. I mean, so much of their defensive problems are just effort. They're not great defensive players individually, by and large, except for Neesmith and Nembhard, guys like that. But I think they can still average 120 plus points per game and play better defense, like we've seen these last 4 games when they're 19th in the league in total defense. I mean, if they can just be somewhere in that area, there's no reason why they shouldn't be a playoff team. But that was one game. We'll see what they do in the long term.
Bob Kravitz is our guest. Bob, as you look at the Pacers, and I know you tweeted this just last night when you were talking about the win over the Rockets, that the rose-colored glasses, to paraphrase, from the goodwill that was built up from the in-season tournament, is those are off now, and it's time to look at the rest of the year. A lot of that post-IST hangover, and the Lakers experienced it as well, felt like fatigue. Do you agree with that premise that, they were playing 7 games in 5 nights, whatever the stretch might have been, and either way, should that be something the league looks at as they fine-tune it and be like, you know what, we're going to adopt even more of the European model. We'll have these group play games early portion of the season, and then quarterfinals, semifinals, that's into February or into March to kind of space this thing out a little more.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think you want to, give teams a reason not to do well in the in-season tournament. And if teams look at what's happened to the Pacers, what's happened to the Lakers since the IST, they may say, it's not worth it. Certainly the money is very, very nice, especially for guys at the end of the bench. But, I could see them continually tweaking this thing and tweaking the schedule so that you're not stuck with these, 5 games in 7 nights or whatever it was with the Pacers.
Bob, it's interesting because to me, for the Lakers, you're right. It's probably not worth it. But for Indiana, I feel like it was, and I'll tell you why.
Oh, yeah.
Because eventually the way that they were playing, they were kind of playing with fire when you're going out there and you're trying to be like the 83 Nuggets and score 150 points and beat everybody 150 to 145. And what they found out was that when stuff really is on the line, teams turn up the wick defensively, and it totally changes the way that they play. And I feel like for the Pacers, it was better for a young team to learn that now as opposed to May, because they were eventually going to run into that wall, right?
Right. Well, you see what's happening with Halliburton, and in a playoff series, teams are going to focus so heavily on Halliburton. And Rick was talking about the other day how Dirk Nowitzki had to learn to be effective from different spots on the floor aside from the low post. How Reggie Miller, after the 99 season, how he became a better one-on-one player, so they couldn't, stop. So because they were stopping him on all the pin downs, and he couldn't get free for his shot. 2000 was a much different deal once he became a better one-on-one player. So I think Halliburton and this whole team, they're just going to have to get used to, being focused upon, in these short series. So, yeah, I think that this was a good thing for the Pacers. Yeah, they've gone in the dumps a little bit since then, 3-6 since the tournament. But I do think it was a great experience for them, and I think it will hold them in good stead if and when they make the playoffs.
Bob, what's the most intriguing storyline in indie sports heading into the new year? Like the one that's going to carry over, and would it be for you this young Pacer team, or is it in fact the Colts? Because we kind of forget about the fact with what they're doing that next year it's somewhat of a reset, but probably an upgrade in totality at the quarterback position.
I'm going to go completely off the reservation here and say the most interesting story heading into the new year to me is Purdue basketball.
Hard to argue that because
they go into the spring and they've got to win. They've got to win. Anything short of a Final Four is a terrible disappointment. So look, I think the Colts are interesting, but right now without their quarterback, they're overachieving. I think the Pacers are intriguing. I'll be very curious to see what they do with Buddy Hield, maybe TJ. They're going to have to move some people. Do they try and take a run at Pascal Siakam? I think that's really interesting, but I think the story that's going to grab everybody's attention come the springtime is Purdue basketball.
For Purdue, and it's interesting, Bob, because there are two ways to look at it. One is to say that the shortcomings of Purdue have put them in this position, and the other is to say, no, it's actually the fact that they've been so good now for a couple of years with a roster that most places would have turned over, and they got everybody back and everybody bought in. So it's a kudos to what they've been able to do. But do you think Matt Painter approaches March any differently than a year ago, to avoid once again in particular? Or is it kind of one of those things, if they get past the first round, they're home free?
I think it's going to be like Virginia. Remember Virginia, I forget who they were playing the year after they lost in the first round to UMBC. They were down by a good 15 points in the first half, if I remember correctly, the next year, the first round game. And they got that one. They won that game, and, of course, they beat Purdue with that miracle shot by Diakite that sent it to overtime. So I think once they get past the first round, I think it'll be fairly smooth sailing, because I think this is the best team in college basketball, and there's just no excuse. Does Matt Painter do something different? I don't think so. I think he just prays that he doesn't have another 16 seed with a bunch of small athletic guards who are going to drive Edey and the rest of that team crazy. But I think the way that Braden Smith is playing, Lawyer, I just think an extra year for those guys, I think that's going to make all the difference.
Gardner Webb, by the way, is the one that was leading Virginia.
Gardner Webb.
I remember people were like, I was in an IndyCar event. I can't remember what race I would have been at, probably St. Pete or Birmingham, and walking up and down pit road, and when that game was going on, and people are like, dude, Gardner Webb's leading Virginia. And you're like, there's no way this is going to happen again. Of course, they righted the ship.
Yeah.
You know, let's go to the Colts, Bob. Bob Kravitz is our guest, by the way, and you can read all of his work. Before we get to the Colts, actually, Bob, tell me what you got upcoming here in terms of your Substack column.
Well, I just wrote about the Pacers today. I'm kind of playing it by ear. I'll probably do something Colts tomorrow. I'm interested in Jonathan Taylor and the fact that he's done really nothing this year, and how much of that is the fact that he's been injured and he had to hold in to start the season. How much of it is maybe they shouldn't have given him all that money? You know, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, and hopefully I'll have an answer in my column once I get around to writing the stupid thing.
The funny thing about it, Bob, with Taylor, and I had mentioned this earlier this week, and I want your thoughts on it. They basically did the Colts, 3 really key players going into the year that you knew were on, free agency years or contract years. Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor, and Grover Stewart was an important one as well. It seems like Pittman and Grover Stewart escalated their value by not being there for different reasons because you saw how much they could be missed. And then Taylor, on the other hand, just created his own absence, and it paid off the most for him. Are they going to pay Stewart and Pittman?
I think they'll definitely pay Pittman. He might get franchised. The franchise tag, I don't know what it is. It's got to be around $20 million.
I think it's 22.5 roughly is what it would be, 23.
Yeah, it's significant. He's going to get paid. He's not going anywhere. I need to get to the bottom of Grover's situation. I'm not sure, how that's going to impact his future with the Colts. But there's no question when he went out, they were giving up a full yard per carry more than when he was in the lineup. So, clearly he's incredibly valuable. And I would think him, Kenny Moore, Blackman, who unfortunately is hurt right now, but he was having a terrific season. I got to think most, if not all, those guys will be back.
Bob, where is the line as you evaluate these final 2 games for just another missed opportunity in the long line of going on a decade plus now of, they'll either get there or they'll just come up short to making the playoffs versus this roster is incomplete, the franchise quarterback's not out there, they lost another key weapon, hopefully not long-term, but just a game in Michael Pittman Jr., and this first-year head coach is making the best of a bad situation. Right. He deserves some credit. Well, where's the line there?
Well, I think that this season has already been a success. Whatever happens these last 2 games, I hear people comparing it to the situation a couple of years ago when they went and lost to the Raiders, and then they lost to Jacksonville. That was a really good team, though. And if you remember, they were good all year, and despite Carson Wentz being giving us the Carson Wentz experience, I just think they're playing with house money at this point. That team a couple of years ago, I think we all expected them to make the playoffs, and given the teams that they rolled Buffalo during the regular season in Buffalo. I think it was 40-15 or something like that. That was a team that had a chance to do something. This is a team that if they get to the playoffs, they're not going to be there very long because there's just a lot of really average teams that have taken advantage of playing a schedule with a lot of backup quarterbacks. Now, I realize the Colts themselves have been using a backup quarterback 90% of the time, but, I think he's the best of the backups. I'll say that. So, no, I think they're playing with house money. I don't think this is similar to the situation a couple of years ago.
Bob, here's my concern. And I want you, Bob Kravitz, to feel free, because I know you will, to tell me if I'm out of my mind, okay? I've looked at this year's Colts season, and I know how much fun it's been for fans, and it's been fun to cover, and it's given us certainly a lot to talk about. And it's been good business for both of us, right? Because people are invested because they've overachieved probably. My concern is that next year, with all the progress that has been made this year with Shane Steichen and with, different running backs that you find out you had some stuff with and with different defensive players rising to the occasion at times and everything kind of bouncing their way, my concern is that next year when you are back to square one in developing a young quarterback, that an increasingly difficult schedule, a bigger bullseye, and suddenly the ball bouncing opposite directions, that everything can come back in a harsh reality for the Colts and that it can hurt Anthony Richardson. Your thoughts?
Well, first they have got to surround him with more weapons. I am so sick. Look, Alec Pierce is a nice young man, and maybe he'll become a player at some point. But I'm tired of hearing all the excuses. Look, if you're a good wide receiver, you got to be able to catch the short ones. You got to be able to catch the ones, in the mid range. I'm just not a fan, is what I'm saying. They've got to surround him with better players. Might they have a worse record next year? It's entirely possible. Just because the schedule this year was so soft. You had so many backup quarterbacks like you'll have this week with Aiden O'Connell. I think it's excuse me. I think it could be a very challenging year next year because, again, Anthony Richardson's essentially going to be a rookie again because he only played, 4 games, parts of 3. He's going to be a rookie again, and he's going to go through the growing pains, and I think they're going to struggle a little bit.
Bob, do you get the sense that for Gardner Minshew moving forward, obviously not here because Anthony Richardson is here, do you get the sense as this season has progressed, he feels like he indeed can be a starter in the NFL, or do you envision a world where, no, he knows what he is, and maybe the Colts would even look at retaining him?
I think the Colts should do everything they can possibly do to retain him. At what price, I don't know. But, Anthony, unfortunately, has not shown that he can stay healthy. It's only a 1-year sample size. I understand that. I'm not saying he's injury prone, but this first year has been fairly concerning. And I have said for years that the backup quarterback is an incredibly important position. We saw what happened in 2011 when Peyton went down, and they're bringing in Kerry Collins and Curtis Painter and Dan Orlovsky. So, I just think you need to have a good backup quarterback if you want to be competitive, because these guys just don't last any longer. I mean, very few guys are playing all 17.
Bob, the other day we were talking about, or I had mentioned that team with Curtis Painter. And I remember when Manning, and it wasn't long after Manning that it was announced that he was going to have the neck surgery that we knew that he was not going to play that year. But when they got Kerry Collins, I thought to myself, okay, they might be able to win 9 or 10 games. And then Kerry Collins came out and he had as much interest in being there as I did at a Barry Manilow concert, right?
Yeah.
And I am convinced, and I want your thought on this. I know we're going on the way back here, but I'm convinced that Bill Polian, for as much as I have at times questioned Bill Polian in different areas, I'm convinced that Bill Polian realized right away that without Peyton Manning, they did not have a roster. And so they made some schematic decisions to go ahead and go with guys that were undrafted free agents or late first-round picks and put them in as starters because he knew at that point what was in play, which was the possibility of Andrew Luck. So
you're saying he sucked for Luck on purpose?
Correct. I think as soon as I think at first they they gave it a go with Collins. And once he saw that Kerry Collins couldn't play, then he realized he was stuck, and so they put Curtis Painter in there until it was too far gone where they basically had secured the number one, and then they went to Orlovsky. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Orlovsky almost screwed it up. I'll never forget Tom Moore, the great old offensive coordinator. Somebody was talking about how the backup quarterback never takes any reps with Peyton Manning around. And somebody said, what do you do if you lose Peyton Manning? He said, and I have to use the correct verbiage here. He says, we don't practice screwed.
Right.
And without Peyton Manning, we're screwed. So they didn't even bother getting reps for the backups. I think the game has changed a lot, and I think the way quarterbacks are going. What I read, 26 backup quarterbacks this year, some crazy number. You've got to have a solid backup, even if it's for 2-3 games. Look at the Jacksonville Jaguars. They need somebody who can get them through these couple of games without Trevor Lawrence. And
they just signed. I don't know if you saw, Jacksonville just signed off the New York practice squad, Matt Barkley. So they know that.
Well, there's a game changer.
Well, but what I'm saying is that probably means they know that at the most critical time, Trevor Lawrence may not be around, right? And they got to get a backup to their backup.
Exactly. So no, I'm a big fan of backup quarterbacks. Even if they don't play, I just think they are so important in today's game.
Bob, where are you on the pulse of the city in terms of, and I know JMV talks about this a lot, of like a vat of suckiness that has happened over the last 5 to 10 years. The idea of this team getting back to the playoffs. The Pacers will have that same weight on their shoulders when we get to April, but for the Colts being on the doorstep again, the importance of, even if it is on the road, being back a part of the postseason national conversation.
Well, I think it's important in the sense that they have overachieved. I think if they lose the last 2 games of the season, which I don't think will happen, but if they lose the last 2, I still think this season has been a success.
Yeah.
I just don't feel like. I mean, people are going to be pissed off they're going to say, oh, it's just like the Wentz year and all that sort of thing. But I don't think that's the case. I think you just have to, this sounds soft, but I think you just have to appreciate what Shane Steichen and Minshew and the rest have done. We were talking in the press room, we go on radio and people ask us, how are the Colts in a playoff situation? How have they won 8 games? And the answer is, I'm not really sure. I mean, they got a good pass rush. They defensively, they get takeaways. They had 19 straight games with a takeaway. But other than that, how do you explain it? And I think a lot of it is the schedule and the fact they're playing a lot of backup quarterbacks and the fact that Minshew is the best of the backup quarterbacks. So, no, I think people will be deeply disappointed, but I think they shouldn't be, is what I'm saying. They shouldn't be, because this team's already gone well beyond at least what I thought they would do. Of course, I said they would win 3-4 games, so what in the hell do I know?
Okay, Bob, before we let you go, 2 things I'm mentioning here on your social calendar. One you probably know, but here's the other one. You ready?
Yeah.
I think the best I'm sitting here looking at it right now, and I'm amazed by this, okay? I'm not saying you, Bob Kravitz, but for people listening, if you are interested in taking kids, for example, to go watch a game. When I was a kid, Bob, I grew up here, and my sister went to University of Evansville, and my dad took me to Hinkle to go see Evansville and Butler play, and I loved it because it was Division I college basketball. They were in the MCC at that time. Wasn't high level, but I loved it because it was Division I college basketball. You can do that here, and I think for a great value for young kids at the Coliseum to go watch IUPUI play, there are options here. But I think the best story in the area right now that nobody's talking about, other than J&V because he went there. How about the Fighting Trees of Indiana State? You can get tickets for like $15 to go watch a team that's, I think, on a 10-game win streak, that's playing at a high level, and Indiana State and what he's done over there and turning that program around is pretty darn cool.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm a big fan of Greg Lansing, so I was a little bummed when they let him go.
I like him as well. Great deal.
Great guy. Was it Shirts? Is that his name? Shirts?
Yes.
Sheets? Shirts. He's done a marvelous job. Obviously, I don't know that much about their program because I don't even know how to pronounce the coach's last name correctly. But they got that one kid, the kid with the goggles. What's his name? Gosh.
The Jokic clone, right?
Jokic guy, yeah.
The
exactly.
collegiate
Jokic.
The collegiate Jokic is essentially what we're going with, right?
Right, exactly.
But in reality,
nice
you are correct. He is obviously a 6'10" big man that they kind of use to run everything through, right? Robbie Avila from Illinois.
Robbie Avila, that's it. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I have not seen them play once all season long, so I could sit here and try and sound smart about them, but I would fail miserably.
You know, I think I'm going to go. They're playing on the 3rd. They got a game. They got a home game on. I think it's a Wednesday night at 7:00, and I think I'm just going to go. I think I'm going to buy tickets and just go over. It's going to be like our Springsteen impromptu trip, Bob. I'm just going to drive over and see who wants to go, which leads to my last point. And you don't have to commit now on the air, put you in a bad spot. But I'm telling you, Michael from the Elect has told me that if you make an appearance on New Year's Eve, they're going to do Springsteen songs for you at the Slippery Noodle.
If he does Rosalita, I'm there.
I'm telling you, I think we can get him to do it, man. You met Michael.
Man.
You saw how free-floating he is and how he's just a laid-back dude. I think he'd do it.
He's a great guy. You know, we were invited to a New Year's Eve party just yesterday, and I'm like, well, I seem to remember that Jake called one night and said, let's all get together. So we'll have to figure this out in the next couple of days.
Well, you text me if you're going to make it over there, and Marty Bacon at the Noodle will make room for you. We might even get you a parking spot. But I understand your dance card's always full.
Well, you know I'm taking an Uber, man.
Fair enough.
You know I'm taking an Uber.
Good point. That's right. I Ubered you all the way to Chicago, so I should know, right?
Hell yes. There's no way I'm getting behind the wheel.
Well, that's smart. Bob, Happy New Year to you, man. We always appreciate it and look forward to your columns.
All right. Take care, man.
All right. Bob Kravitz joining us on the program. I'm telling you, I think it's a week from tonight. Indiana State is at home, and I'm looking online right here. Now, the Trees, you want to talk, the Trees have won. They got Michigan State coming up. Is that tomorrow? When do they play Michigan State? The 30th. What day of the week is the 30th?
Saturday.
It would be Saturday.
So Saturday, they're in East Lansing, right? Then they got Evansville over in Terre Haute a week from tonight. Is that a week from tonight? The 3rd? At 7 o'clock.
Yep.
I think I'm going to head over there. I should just buy like 4 tickets, and whoever wants to go, like, meet me at Monument Circle. We're just going to drive and go. I'd like to get J&V there, but he's on the air, of course. He wouldn't be able to make it.
On Saturday?
No, he's talking about the Wednesday.
No, Wednesday
game.
night.
The Wednesday game. 7 o'clock.
Wednesday night against Evansville.
Live show from Indiana State.
How about that, man? I did a live show from Indiana State when they played Butler and then beat them.
Really?
Yeah. John McDonald, a sales guy for the radio station I was working for at the time, stormed the court. He and like 25 20-year-olds, and then like one 50-year-old dude in a suit running out there hugging players. Who's this guy? The Aces, on the other hand, Evansville's actually off to a decent start, right? Isn't Evansville 10-2? I think. I could be wrong in that. I think I'm looking at it right here. Evansville's lost to BYU and Missouri State. That program was absolutely in the tank. And they're 10-2. I didn't realize that they'd turn things around. Good for them, because that program was, literally on life support. The Michigan State game is going to be important for Indiana State for sure. Michigan State has played a grueling schedule, and in Tom Izzo fashion, I think they might be kind of starting to figure things out. So that's a little bit dangerous.
But if you get the win, then it could be as dangerous as you
bar
want.
The door, right?
Because it's a big resume win for the
Honestly, if you get the
Sycamores.
win, then you're probably like, here's the $1 million question. if Indiana State beats Michigan State, and they are, at that point, I think they'd be either 11 or 12-1. If they win that game, do they get a vote in the AP Top 25?
Ooh.
I thought they got votes already.
I'm looking right here. Indiana has a vote in the coaches poll. In the media poll, I see Iowa State, San Diego State. I don't see Grand Canyon. I don't see Indiana State.
No. Yeah, you're right. No votes in the AP.
That's what I want to see. I want to see them get a vote. I want to see them ranked. What the hell? Let's go for it.
Yeah,
right?
I think if you get a win over Michigan State on the road, you should.
I mean, they should at least merit. I mean, as much as like James Madison. I mean, James Madison's 12-0. Let's look at who's James Madison beaten. They're 12-0. They beat Michigan State. Okay, great. Right.
I was thinking of last week. They got a vote in the coaches poll.
Last week. Why would they drop one if they? You know what I mean?
I don't know.
That Michigan State's the win that gets you in. You get that win over Michigan State.
You're right, because James you knew James Madison beat Michigan State, and that's obviously impressive. Michigan State to open the year. James Madison beat Keystone.
That's a crossing? I didn't know they had a school. That's
they
crazy.
beat Keystone, right? I mean, what was Kessler off the schedule? They got Keystone. Great. All right. Keystone only brought half their roster because the other half was under construction.
That was after a back-to-back against Fall Creek the night before, so it was tough.
Exactly. Keystone actually really slows things down. That's the thing. They try to slow you down, Keystone, but you can get around it, and they did exactly that. James Madison, come on. Indiana State should be ranked over James Madison. Nothing against JMU because Indiana got their football coach from there. people have already reached out to me very kindly to let me know that they have a ticket if I wanted to go to Indiana State. You just heard John talking about it there. Tyler King, for example, whose dad, Mike King, longtime, I'm forever indebted to Mike because he's the guy that brought me on the IMS radio network.
Legend.
And Mike's one of my favorite people on the planet. I mean, we've had a ton of fun together over the years. And Tyler's like, hey, my dad would probably love to see you. My only thing is I would like to buy the tickets just because I want Indiana State to sell more tickets because they deserve it the way that they have played, right? Speaking, by the way, of athletics in the state of Indiana as it relates to Indiana on the college level, Eddie, we do have breaking news. Former Indiana Mr. Football, I'm pretty sure that that's correct, and Ball State running back, most recently for UCLA, Carson Steele, after 847 rushing yards this year for the Bruins, where he averaged 5 yards per carry, by the way, in Chip Kelly's offense, and added, by the way, to that, another just under 200 yards in receiving, has announced that he will forego his eligibility to enter the NFL draft. Now, the question for either of you guys, is Carson Steele an NFL player?
I realize this is awful radio, and I apologize. This is what happens when we have our on the fly. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to be a household name at the running back position, but like if you are a player that is able to sustain, you mentioned Jake in basketball, how players all the time, the best player at high school, they're one of the best players in college, and they find their life in the NBA.
Correct.
And they sink or swim based on accepting a role and no longer being that best player.
Correct. Like he's not going to go in and be a primary back somewhere.
That is life in the NFL for running backs today. If
But
you
the
are
thing
willing
about
to
him-
have a role, then yeah.
Here's the thing. He's 6'1", 225. That guy has exceeded. Like, I didn't think he was going to be a great college player based on his size. And from the time that he was a freshman at Center Grove, I mean, every step of the way, he has exceeded expectation. And I would agree with you that it's really hard to envision where it may be that he gets the chance. But at this point, it'd be really hard to rule him out, man, because he has answered every single challenge. I didn't think there was any way that he was going to be a 5-yard per carry carrier in a program like UCLA.
And that's not something that's going to be asked of him necessarily at the next level. But, like, yeah, as even his build, or it might not jump off the page, that's not a stylistic size that rules you out anymore at that position with how NFL is and with how quickly teams go through running backs. So, no, I think that as long as you're willing to realize that it could be a long road and you'll be either bouncing around teams or you'll be trying to fight for where your slice of the pie is, as long as you have those expectations, which I think he will, yeah, why not?
Have you guys watched any of the bowl games?
I watched a brief bit last night, but no, I've not.
Kansas and UNLV last night, right?
That was fun.
Not
Defense was optional.
Now that you say that, I don't remember.
Kansas beat UNLV, and then they fought afterwards, right?
Yes.
I did see that on Twitter.
I watched a little of Texas State and Rice.
Is that what you were watching, Jimmy? You were watching Christian McCaffrey's brother?
Yes.
Dixie State?
No, that's not what I watched. Minnesota Bowling Green is what I watched some of. It was a 2:00 game yesterday.
Who won that game, by the way? Minnesota's like
Minnesota
won
by
5-8.
6.
Yeah, Minnesota won.
So they're now only 2 games under 500.
There you go.
Cool. How about Friday when we're on the air? I'm going to miss the entire Clemson bowl game.
I'm going to miss part of the Notre Dame bowl game.
Yeah, you're right.
Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl.
Would you rather be in the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl and go to El Paso or the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl in Jacksonville?
Give me El Paso.
Ooh, really?
Only for the name. I'm
I'm
buying the brand there. The Tony the Tiger Bowl, if I'm not getting like a month's at least supply of Frosted Flakes for that bowl game, then I don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I guess now players could use the Tax Slayer service because of their NIL money, right? I think the Gator Bowl still has some cachet to it, does it not?
Yes.
The Sun Bowl, I felt bad for Purdue because the Sun Bowl early, like when Purdue went to the Sun Bowl, it was kind of exciting. And then they went like 9 years in a row. And after a while, you're like, okay, we've kind of done all of the activities there are to do here.
Time for a solar eclipse for these bowl games.
That's right.
Need to move away from the Sun Bowl.
But I think the thing that's going to be interesting in the bowl games, first off, it is disappointing, and I don't know how you take care of this. And I feel bad for the bowl games themselves because you have certain bowl games that the team that's in it is like thrilled because they haven't been to a bowl game forever. And then you have other bowl games that you know that the fans and the teams there are like, really? I remember covering a Tennessee football game because Peyton Manning had gone back to UT. And Tennessee lost at home to South Carolina. This would have been like probably 05, maybe 04. Towards the end of the Phil Fulmer era in Tennessee. It might have been actually the game that kind of put it over the top. So Tennessee loses this game. It was a night game. They lose at home to Steve Spurrier in South Carolina, who wasn't very good. It knocked them down and relegated them down to like basically they're going to be 500, so they're going to be bowl eligible based on their name recognition. And afterwards, there were two guys in there from the Liberty Bowl, and they had on like polyester sport coats with the patch that said Liberty Bowl. And as they were in there to invite Phil Fulmer to the Liberty Bowl, it was like being in a mausoleum. It was like a funeral. Everybody's staring at the floor, like Phil Fulmer's wife is in there crying. And these two guys are so excited at the opportunity to invite Tennessee to their bowl game because they're used to having like South Carolina and, Minnesota. And the guy goes up to ask Phil Fulmer officially to invite him to the Liberty Bowl, and I'll never forget, his patch came unattached on his little sport coat and like was like flimsy and falling off, and I thought, man, this is sad to see. But there are teams that if they go to a bowl game like that are thrilled to be there, right? Florida State, the reason my point here, Florida State, and this is the situation that you run into. I don't even blame them per se, but Florida State's roster, they have like 27 players that have opted out of that game.
Yep.
Including what would have been their starting quarterback is transferring.
That was tough because you have all this whole battle of, we were robbed and it's the ACC's fault, which it kind of is, and all this other stuff. But then, like, look, I don't fault players for any of this, but I will make one exception. It doesn't matter. All it is moral victory, pride, all that good stuff. But the idea of lacing them up one more time and taking down Georgia, like everybody buying in because, hey, we were disrespected by the committee, weren't approved of them, they made a mistake. You're not going to have that now because of the amount of opt-outs, because of the amount of indifference that you have about this game. And the national narrative will then change for those that don't know about all those opt-outs, that don't follow it closely, and they'll say, well, see, that's why they didn't put him in, because Georgia beat him by 20. Like, there has to be a level of pride there for me in that scenario.
Can you imagine if Florida State actually wins that game? I mean, I can't imagine. Like, I can't see it happening. So I said, can you imagine? More than 20 players. I think it's 27 players, right? Are like, yeah, I'm good.
Yep.
And I kind of get it. I understand it to an extent. Because of just as a fan, it is so hard when you are, I mean, I'm a Clemson fan. You're a Notre Dame fan. Like, when you have the years that you are convinced that are going to be a potential national championship year, and then you're kind of relegated out of that.
Tony the Tiger is going to be high-fiving Marcus Freeman.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry, it's not the same.
Correct.
I'm sorry.
That's right. That's right. And so, can you imagine?
I'm still going to watch.
Players that are going to Florida State or Notre Dame or Clemson are going there to play in the college football playoff. They're not going there to get cereal and mountain border trips, right?
Yeah. And that's why I don't fault the players, because look, I get it.
I can't imagine the level of
bowl games used to mean something, but if you are not, and they're going to keep some of the names and remodify it for the 12-team expansion next year, but if you're not there and you're a program with real expectations, like, it is a money-making cash grab. Nothing is really gained from it as a player. I don't buy into the need that you need to go and be a part of the AutoZone Liberty Bowl because your team is there. Like, do what's best for you. You're not going to get high-level compensation if you get hurt in the game. You don't owe anybody anything.
When Indiana had Bill Mallory, bowl games, obviously there were fewer bowl games, but Indiana's program was such that it was a massive deal for them to get to a bowl game.
Sure.
And I can still tell you, they went to the All-American Bowl and lost to Sammy Smith in Florida State. Then they went to the Peach Bowl, where they lost to Tennessee or Auburn. Then they went to the Liberty Bowl and beat South Carolina. Then they went back to the Peach Bowl that time and lost to Auburn. So it was Tennessee first, then Auburn. Then they went to the Insight.com Bowl, which at the time was known as the Copper Bowl, and blanked Baylor. I think it was 31-0. And that was their last bowl win. They've been back to bowl games since, but that was their last bowl win. But it was a big deal because Indiana was not accustomed to going to bowl games, and it truly meant something. But yes, to your point, there's a difference between the level of expectation of player going in to an Indiana versus the others. What is the line right now on Florida State, Georgia? It's got to be 27, right? One for each player that's opted out. And I'm sure Georgia had players that opted out. Georgia got screwed too. Florida State got really hosed, right?
What was your guess?
27?
18.5.
You'd have to take that at this point, right?
I think so. I mean, I hate double-digit spreads across the board, but yeah, that's probably the way to go.
I mean, that's
a spread that you would see on the second, or if it got to your level, that's a spread you see on the second week of the season when it's like Georgia versus Idaho.
So tonight's bowl games, the Military Bowl, Virginia Tech and Tulane. You can start thinking about these for your plays of the day, Jimmy. The most horrific moment in sports happens tonight.
Oh.
Actually happens towards the end of John's show. No.
Yes.
No.
I've lost the. Oh wait. Oh, is it tonight?
Yes, and
is
it's
on
our airwaves.
Oh, is it really?
Yes.
Oh man, why don't we have something in here in honor of it?
Because the chairman of the board hates the said product.
That's okay, man.
North Carolina and West Virginia. There's nothing more appropriate than West Virginia and North Carolina in the Mayo Bowl.
The Duke's Mayo Bowl.
I mean, that's caviar in the Appalachians, right? Like the Duke's Mayo Bowl, of course, North Carolina and West Virginia.
That'll be a nice turnout.
They ain't taking USC, right? Nobody from Southern California or even like Colorado, they ain't playing in the Mayo Bowl. They're like, what's our target audience? Oh, where do people most often eat? Can we partner with Wonder Bread? The Duke's Mayo Bowl, North Carolina and West Virginia, at which point the winner gets, and it should be the loser. It should be the loser gets dunked in mayo, which of course is the spawn of the devil.
It's
the
only
worst
one
stuff on the planet.
I'm not the only one that utilizes it, especially with the tenderloins in this fine state. I love a good Indiana breaded tenderloin with some mayo. Yes.
Mayonnaise is the most disgusting condiment known to man. It is awful. What is it? Egg whites? Puke. Like vinegar? Puke. What else is in there?
Deliciousness. What's in there?
Oh, horrific. Yeah. I'm telling you right now, like, it is the most. Anyway, I digress. DirecTV Holiday Bowl, Louisville and USC tonight. It's actually a decent game, right? But those are two teams, again, I mean, Louisville was right on the cusp of potentially being in the conversation for the in the next year, Louisville is a team that would be in the playoff, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was a conversation for it this year.
And then you got USC, forget about it, in terms of the year. And then A&M and Oklahoma State in the Petco Park San Diego Bowl.
So which one are you locked in for all of them? You going to watch them all just back to back to back? Is that your?
Oh no, I'm sorry. The NRG Stadium Houston Tax Act Texas Bowl is Texas A&M and Oklahoma State.
It's okay. Don't disrespect a legacy game like that.
I'll tell you what I'm guaranteed to watch. What I'm guaranteed to watch is the beginning of the Louisville USC game, because by doing that, it means that I don't have to see the horrific act of absolute, like, satanic porn of the mayo being dumped on somebody at the end of that other crap. Not going to watch it. Not going to watch it. I'm telling you. And
Okay,
everybody in the crowd's going to be eating mayonnaise sandwiches.
The window is here. Jake's going to like me less now, but it's what it is.
It's not even the main brand of mayo.
No, I know. It should be Hellman's there. Anyway, when they dump the coach in mayo, you can tweet him at Jake Query with those videos.
Not going to do it.
Go ahead and do it.
Blocked. Immediately blocked. You think there's any coincidence that the most
famous
famous brand
Twitter account?
Think about this. What does somebody say when
company.
they first taste mayonnaise? The very first time they taste it, what do they say?
Yum.
Delicious.
No, they go, hell, man.
Nice.
Awful.
Nice. Well done. That's good. I tipped the cap.
Where do you think the name came from?
Let Bill Estes put you behind the wheel of the powerhouse brands that define.
This is me, all right? I'm not a athlete. This is my way. This is how I win.
Today's plays of the day. First, we go across the pond. Pick Manchester City to win on the money line against Everton. That is a Premier League game that they have to have. In the NBA, we will take the Phoenix Suns to win the money line over the Houston Rockets. Bowl season time is ongoing. We'll lay the 6 on Louisville tonight against USC in the Holiday Bowl. And then God's gift to man, the Duke's Mayo Bowl, will scoop the 5.5, North Carolina 5.5-point dogs against West Virginia. That tonight at 5:30. Of course, those celebration videos, again, you can send at Jake Query on Twitter.
Nope. As a matter of fact, Chris Widlick, every night I watch back-to-back episodes of Seinfeld on, like, Channel 252. And every other commercial is Chris Widlick talking about how he enjoys covering high school kids, which is totally cool. And I love Chris Widlick, and I respect his work. And it's sad that I have to block him because he just told me that he loves Duke's Mayo. Or is it Duke's Mayo? Is that what it is? He said it's fabulous. It's better than Hellman's. It's got it's total heaven, he says.
I'll have to
total
try
heaven.
some. I've never had Duke's Mayo before, so maybe I need to.
Well, that's what we had in our coffee on the morning show with Deichten and Bone. And
but that is objectively gross.
I just quit tasting it like 2 weeks ago.
Like there are certain things that do not
Everything
go
about
together.
it's gross.
Do you think that Will Levis thought, hey, that guy had peanut butter and chocolate, all of a sudden he made a masterpiece, and then it was like, oh, no, this is actually going to be my masterpiece. It's not.
The viscosity of the mixture of mayonnaise and saliva alone when someone eats it is absolutely disgusting. It's disgusting. What do you put mayo on?
Primarily tenderloins.
Okay, tenderloin's fabulous. Why do you need mayo?
I
it's
just
great
like
in itself.
I like that added into the flavor of the tenderloin.
Eddie, what do you put mayonnaise on?
A chicken sandwich. Sometimes I combine it with ketchup and put it on a burger.
A burger's great. Ketchup's good. Why screw it up? Why need any more? Right?
I don't have a problem with it.
Sometimes there'll be like a horseradish mayo that I just find very tasty. It's not as, sorry to gross out the audience and Jake, it's not as thick as regular mayo, and it has a little bit more spice to it.
Plop.
Okay.
Jake, do you eat Chick-fil-A?
Do I eat Chick-fil-A? I like Chick-fil-A, yes.
Do you use any other sauces?
No.
Okay, never mind then.
You're about to shatter a worldview.
Chick-fil-A is fabulous. Why would you need sauce on it?
The Chick-fil-A sauce is...
Rake, do you like mayo? Greg Rakestraw just walked in. He is in for JMV.
Does it look like I like mayo?
I don't know. It's why.
That's why. I was going to ignore the crosstalk thing, and I was sitting here bubbling outside, and I'm like, okay, I have to chime in here. One, the standard arrogance of Jake, thinking that his taste buds match everybody else's on the planet. Why would you ruin it? Maybe people like it. However, I will act as the prosecuting attorney on this case in your behalf.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Of the four of us that are having this conversation right now, clearly one of us doesn't like mayo. That's you. I would follow up with, who is the skinniest of the four of us having this conversation right now? That's you. The state rests,
awful.
Your Honor. You're done.
It's awful.
It's like, do you
listen? I like stuff that's not healthy. Don't get me wrong.
Do you like iced tea? Like not like the wrapper.
You know
I mean like the drink.
I do not. Believe it or not.
I don't either. But I also then realize it's probably more of my taste buds than it is like the entire planet has it wrong.
Does tea have an acquired taste? Because every time
I'm not going to acquire it, so no.
Right.
You and I have been around long enough. We're not going to acquire it by now.
Am I just going to go out and rake leaves and just put them in my mouth and chew them up? Because that's what tea tastes like to me. It just tastes like leaves.
I'm going to take your word for it, and no. I would describe it as something else, which I can't say, probably via FCC regulations.
Fair enough. And we can't have you violate FCC violations because you were on for the next couple of hours.
And the fine would go to John and not me. That's the way it works, right?
Wow.
If you drop bombs and you're filling in for somebody else is paying the fine, right?
I like that.
Okay.
Well, I saw you brought money in, so I guess
did.
you're ready to go.
$5 whole.
Greg Rakestraw is in next, and he will bring you home. And do not send me Mayo videos unless you want to be blocked. We'll be back tomorrow at noon.
93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.